On the very first day of school, Joe Yu slapped the campus beauty in the face without even trying, because the class he awakened was the only hidden class in the entire world, Necromancer. Meanwhile, she had only awakened as a low-tier healer, the kind of support class you could find anywhere. His girlfriend, Yan Ruliu, broke up with him right there, in front of everyone. All because Joe's starting spirit stat was a big fat 0. That meant, once he entered dungeons, he would probably become dead weight for any team. But what none of them knew was that Joe had awakened a talent so broken, it almost made no sense. This talent could raise all his other stats to match the value of one chosen stat, and whenever he killed an enemy in close combat, he would gain 1 free attribute point. With that ability, Joe Yu would eventually become the true all-around mage god guarding Blue Star. This world was actually a parallel world almost identical to Blue Star, but hundreds of eras ago, an unprecedented disaster struck the planet. Ever since then, dungeon portals had appeared all across the world. After reaching adulthood, humans could register as players, awaken their classes, enter dungeons, kill monsters, gain experience, level up, and grow stronger. And today was the day every student registered, changed classes, and officially stepped onto the path of a player. The moment Joe stepped into the class change formation, a strange system voice rang out inside his head. The system congratulated him for drawing a hidden mage-type class, Necromancer. Joe looked down at his own hands, so excited he could barely speak. Mage classes were already powerful, and he had awakened one of the rarest types among them. Legends said a necromancer could wave his staff and summon countless undead creatures from another realm through the gates of hell. On ancient battlefields, a top necromancer could stand alone against an entire army. Still buzzing with excitement, Joe immediately opened his attribute panel. But what he saw nearly froze him on the spot. His spirit stat was 0. Starting attributes were randomly assigned based on a player's class traits, with a single stat reaching up to 10 points at most. For a mage, spirit was the most important stat. If it fell below 2.5, the mage's skill performance would be almost completely crippled. Then, the system informed Joe that his class change was complete, and he now needed to choose his starting class talent. At that moment, Joe had almost given up on the path of a player. But in the very next second, the system slapped reality right back across his face. It congratulated him for drawing a talent called Mage's Braveheart, unknown grade, and awarded him 10 free attribute points. Passive effect: whenever the player kills an enemy through close combat, the player receives free attribute points. Unique active effect: the player can raise every other attribute to match the value of one selected attribute. Joe could hardly believe what he was seeing. Free attribute points were incredibly hard to obtain. Aside from leveling up, getting them anywhere else mostly came down to luck. But Braveheart's passive effect meant that as long as Joe killed enemies in melee combat, he could steadily farm free attribute points. The active effect was even more ridiculous. It could only be used once, but it could raise every stat to the same level. In other words, if Joe played this right, he could become a true all-around monster, completely fixing the fatal weakness of mages being fragile and easy to kill. If he used it right now, every stat would jump straight to 10. In the beginner stage, having 10 points in every attribute would be unheard of. But if he waited until one stat reached 1,000 or even 10,000, then used the active skill, he would become a necromancer with tens of thousands of points across every stat. That would be a real walking disaster. The only catch was that his passive required him to fight up close. So, Joe simply dumped all 10 free attribute points from the talent reward into strength. After that, under the system's guidance, he was teleported to the beginner mission pool. Only by completing the beginner mission could he truly finish the class change ceremony. Standing there was a figure who looked almost like an elf. She introduced herself as Elaine, the guide of the mission pool. After learning that Joe had come to complete his beginner mission, Elaine took out a gift pack and handed it to him. After opening it, Joe received a full set of beginner equipment and an F-grade skill book called Skeleton Summoning. But that skill book was useless to him for now, since his spirit stat was still 0. The staff, however, was a different story. It looked like a tool for casting spells, but the material did not seem like ordinary stone. With his current 20 strength, it was perfect as a melee weapon. Joe then asked Elaine for the details of his beginner mission. With a ding, the system announced, player Joe Yu's beginner mission is to escape the Misty Cave. Mission warning: while escaping, the player must not kill the skeleton soldiers in the map, and must leave the dungeon as quickly as possible. But before Elaine could even finish speaking, Joe had already stepped into the teleportation gate leading to the Misty Cave. What appeared before him was a gloomy cave littered with skulls. Soon, a skeleton soldier lunged at Joe from behind. Joe instantly grabbed his staff and charged straight at it. With just one swing, he knocked 20 HP off the skeleton soldier. Joe was shocked. Who would have thought a mage with all points in strength could hit this hard? Then the system informed him that he had killed a skeleton soldier through melee combat, earning 1 free attribute point and 3 experience points. Since this was the first wild monster he had ever killed, the system also rewarded him with an A-grade passive skill. Raw Strength Works Miracles. Unique effect. Every 1 point of strength is converted into 2 points of attack. In other words, if the target monster had 0 defense, Joe could now deal 42 damage with 1 punch. That was already a very solid skill. After that, Joe charged straight into the group of skeleton monsters. At that point, it was basically 1 punch, 1 victim. Before long, the system told him he had gained 5 attribute points. His strength had already reached 30. In the beginner stage, a single stat reaching 10 was already considered excellent. A single stat reaching 30 was something Joe would never have dared to imagine before. But something about the Misty Cave felt strange. It only kept spawning skeleton soldiers. Even for a beginner dungeon, it should not have been this easy. Just then, a chilling sound suddenly came from up ahead. A much larger skeleton-type creature slowly walked out of the mist. The system identified it as an elite monster, Skeleton Soldier Captain. Joe looked at its attribute panel, and his expression changed. Its strength was actually 15. No beginner player could survive a clean hit from that thing, so Joe immediately targeted its weakness. Only 1 point in agility, he swung his staff and rushed forward first. But even though Joe moved fast, the skeleton captain still raised its shield steadily and blocked his attack. The moment the skeleton captain smashed its spear into the ground and forced Joe back, Joe instantly caught the opening it had exposed. Gripping his staff with both hands, he slammed it down on the skeleton captain's skull with lightning speed. That one heavy blow shaved off 50 HP. The system informed him that he had killed the skeleton captain through melee combat, rewarding him with 3 free attribute points. Joe finally understood. The system reward was tied to the monster's level. In other words, if he focused on killing higher level monsters, he could gain more free attribute points. On top of that, monsters had a chance to drop soul cores. Opening a soul core would grant a random reward. As luck would have it, the skeleton captain had dropped one. Joe opened the soul core and received a D-grade one-time item, Skeleton Gauntlet. After equipping it, his next attack would trigger a guaranteed critical hit. As Joe continued deeper into the cave, more and more skeleton soldiers appeared in front of him. Even though he had been leveling as much as possible, his HP was still only 20, so he had to stay careful. About 2.5 minutes later, Joe had raised his experience to 20 by killing skeleton monsters non-stop. His strength had already reached 46. Meanwhile, outside the beginner dungeon, almost every other player had already finished their trial. Everyone looked confused. This year's beginner mission was supposed to be extremely easy. Even players who awakened support classes should have come out by now. But the dungeon gates still had not closed, which meant someone was still inside. Most people guessed that the player inside must have awakened some useless class. At that same moment, Joe had basically cleared out all the skeleton soldiers in the dungeon. But a few moments later, he witnessed something shocking. The scattered skulls around him suddenly shot past him, one after another. Then, with a series of heavy impacts, those skulls fused into a massive skull. After more and more bones merged together, it finally formed a giant skeleton monster covered in ghostly blue flames. The system announced that this was the king-class monster of the Misty Cave, Skeleton King. Joe was stunned. Was this some kind of joke? How could a boss-level monster appear in a beginner dungeon? In the next second, the Skeleton King raised its giant axe and swung it down at Joe. Joe shifted his body and barely dodged the strike in time. But in that instant, he noticed something important. Just like the Skeleton Captain earlier, the Skeleton King had high strength, but its agility was clearly lacking. So Joe immediately used the same method as before and began defending while counterattacking. His attacks worked, but each hit only dealt 32 damage. That meant if he wanted to kill the Skeleton King, he would need to counterattack more than 20 times under the same dangerous conditions. Fortunately, the monster was extremely slow, so dealing with it was not impossible. Before long, Joe saw that the Skeleton King had only around 200 HP left. But then, the Skeleton King suddenly spoke. It said it had guarded the Misty Cave for hundreds of years, yet it had never seen anyone kill their way through the dungeon like this. As soon as it finished speaking, its entire body trembled, and its aura became far more terrifying. Joe immediately realized this had to be its berserk state. From the way it sounded, Joe seemed to be the only person who had ever seen this form. Charging head-on was no longer an option. He had to restrict its movement first. Then, Joe suddenly noticed a massive boulder hanging loose behind the Skeleton King. Maybe he could use that rock. While the Skeleton King was distracted, Joe quickly moved closer to the boulder. Then he looked up at the Skeleton King. Joe coldly taunted it. "Hey, big idiot. I'm over here." Sure enough, the Skeleton King charged at him in a rage. The very next second, Joe swung his staff and quickly held it in front of himself. Then he deliberately pretended to run out of strength, acting as if he had no choice but to take the Skeleton King's attack head-on. The next second, the boulder finally crashed down from above. The Skeleton King had no time to react, and its massive body was instantly pinned beneath the falling rocks. Joe stared at the scene in front of him, his heart still pounding. That had been way too close. A casual strike from the Skeleton King had almost wiped out his entire HP bar. Then, Joe leaped into the air. He immediately equipped the D-grade Skeleton Gauntlet. The moment his giant fist came crashing down, nearly 150 points were ripped from the Skeleton King's HP bar. Right after that, the system announced that the beginner mission was complete. Congratulations to Joe Yu for officially becoming a beginner player and achieving the first kill of the Misty Cave boss, the Skeleton King. Reward: 30 free attribute points. He also received a C-grade equipment item. Skeleton King's Ring, unique effect. After equipping it, the player's first normal attack deals 50% more damage. Cooldown: 24 hours. Its effect was not as explosive as the Skeleton Gauntlet, but it was reusable, which still made it very valuable. More importantly, if a C-grade item like this was listed in the marketplace, it could sell for at least around 250,000 blue star coins. But what excited Joe even more was the first kill achievement for the dungeon boss. That meant before him, no one had ever seen or killed the Skeleton King. And that only made Joe more confused. Did no one else actually clear the beginner mission? Or had he rushed in too fast and missed some important warning? After thinking for a moment, Joe decided to leave the dungeon first and figure out the truth once he got outside. The moment Joe Yu teleported out of the beginner dungeon, a chubby guy slapped him on the shoulder from behind. Seeing that Joe had taken so long to come out, he had honestly thought Joe had died inside. This guy was Young Shun-di, Joe's classmate and childhood friend. Just like Joe, he had also awakened as a mage-type class. Right then, their homeroom teacher announced from the stands that every student in the class had completed their class registration. Next up was tomorrow's team-based beginner trial. To help everyone choose teammates based on class traits, the teacher asked each student to introduce the class they had awakened. Most students in the class had awakened warrior-type classes, and their talent grades were basically between D and F, but a few top students had awakened rare classes like Paladin and Priest. The most eye-catching one was the class monitor, Mage, who had awakened a sword cultivator class with a B-grade talent. In Dragon Country, where the sword was worshipped above all else, a sword cultivator was practically a top-tier existence. Even across Blue Star, it was still an extremely powerful class. Their teacher also showed a satisfied smile. After all, any student who awakened a B-grade talent could already be considered a genius. When it was Joe's turn, he told everyone that he had awakened a hidden class, Necromancer. As for his talent grade, even he did not know. The moment he said that, the whole class was stunned. Sword cultivators were strong, but if you searched across Dragon Country, you could still find a handful of them. Necromancers, however, were only recorded in ancient books. Legend had it that in ancient times, one necromancer once wiped out an entire guild over a personal grudge. After hearing this, Ma Fei only froze for a brief second. He did not think a hidden class was anything special. Even if Joe was a necromancer, he still had the same weakness as any mage: low HP, weak defense, and extreme vulnerability once an enemy got close. On top of that, necromancers spent years dealing with undead creatures, so their bodies were often even weaker than normal people's. Their summoning spells also had long cast times. Without teammates protecting them up close, they were basically walking targets on the battlefield. Ma Fei also believed Joe was not really clueless about his talent grade. He probably just had a grade too low to say out loud. After everyone finished introducing their classes, the teacher announced the end of the ceremony and told them all to go home and get into their best condition. When Joe returned home, he called out like usual, "I'm back," but the only thing that answered him was the silent air. This was the old house his parents had left behind before they disappeared. In Joe's memory, his parents had always been gentle and loving toward him. But when Joe was 6, his parents were suddenly called away on an emergency mission and flew to the capital overnight. After that, they vanished under mysterious circumstances. That was why Joe had to get an excellent score on tomorrow's exam. Only then would he have a real chance of getting into Capital University, the top academy in the Dragon Federation. The next day, before the exam began, the teacher reminded everyone of one important thing. If they encountered danger in the trial that they could not handle, they had to exit the exam dungeon immediately. Generally speaking, beginner exam dungeons did not result in the deaths of new players, but 25 years ago, a horrific incident had occurred. An entire class of more than 40 students was wiped out in a beginner dungeon because of a major accident. In the end, not even their bodies were found. It was as if they had evaporated inside the dungeon. To this day, no one knew what kind of terrifying dungeon it had been. To make later generations remember the incident, people temporarily named that dungeon Nightmare Village. The teacher told them not to worry too much. Although every class's beginner exam dungeon was random, Nightmare Village had not appeared again in all these years. After giving his warning, the teacher began the countdown and announced the official start of the beginner exam. Then came a sharp crack. Everyone was wrapped in a flash of light. And in the next instant, they were teleported into the beginner exam dungeon. The class followed Ma-Fei's lead and began walking deeper into the dungeon. Joe, however, felt something was off. Normally, the system would give a prompt as soon as they entered a dungeon. But this time, there was nothing. On top of that, the dark and oppressive surroundings gave him a bad feeling. Suddenly, an oddly dressed old man appeared in front of them. Joe guessed that this was probably the starting NPC of the dungeon. Sure enough, the old man soon opened his mouth and welcomed them to the S-rank beginner exam dungeon, Nightmare Village. The requirements to clear the trial were simple. First, leave this place alive. Second, uncover the core secret of Nightmare Village. Hearing this, everyone felt like thunder had exploded inside their heads. Their luck was almost unbelievable. By pure chance, they had actually rolled the same Nightmare Village dungeon that once wiped out an entire class. Some students immediately chose to leave the dungeon and save their own lives. After all, if converted into ordinary dungeon standards, an S-rank beginner exam dungeon was roughly equivalent to an E-rank regular dungeon, and an E-rank dungeon usually required at least an early stage player to clear it. With their current apprentice level strength, clearing it was nearly impossible. However, every student who tried to exit was bounced back by an invisible barrier. Then the NPC told them that once someone stepped into Nightmare Village, they could never leave unless they cleared it. Joe thought to himself that this explained why the previous class had been completely wiped out. But this old man did not seem malicious, so what he said was probably true. They had to uncover Nightmare Village's core secret if they wanted to get out. Sure enough, the old man then revealed his identity. He was Wogan, the village chief of Nightmare Village. According to the village chief, there were 2 rules for living here. First, they must not touch the black stones on the doors of the houses. Second, they had to return indoors before nightfall and close every door and window. Joe then asked the village chief the question on his mind. He did not understand why they could not leave the house after dark. The village chief did not answer directly. He only told them that once night came, they would naturally understand. After that, Ma-Fei arranged everyone into 4 teams of 11. Each team would act as a unit and find a house to hide in first. Joe's team chose to spend the night on the 2nd floor of one of the houses. Deep into the night, a classmate named Liu Yu suddenly saw his grandmother outside the window. The grandmother curled her hands and begged him to open the window, saying she wanted to come inside to warm up. The moment Liu Yu heard that, he opened the window without hesitation. By the time Joe saw what was happening, it was already too late. He could only quickly warn Liu Yu from behind that this was not his grandmother. But by then, the ghost outside had already grabbed Liu Yu by the shoulder. Just as its huge mouth was about to bite down, a stream of sand wrapped around the ghost's body in time. This was one of Yang Shengdi's control skills as a mage. The ghost instantly returned to its original form. A level 3, ordinary wild monster, Nightmare. Everyone was shocked. Something with such a terrifying ability was only an ordinary monster inside an S-rank dungeon. At that moment, the Nightmare locked its target onto Yang Shengdi. Luckily, Zuo Yo quickly cast Holy Shield and stood in front of Yang Shengdi. Zhao Ziwei also moved behind her and began restoring her HP continuously. With everyone working together to defend, blocking the Nightmare's attacks should not be a problem. Once Zhou summoned an undead creature, the fight would be over. But no one expected Zhou himself to be the first one to charge forward. Yang Shengdi quickly reminded him that a staff was meant for casting magic, and if the Nightmare entered his body, there would be almost no way to dodge it. But in the next second, Zhou's staff slammed down with a loud crack, smashing directly into the Nightmare's forehead. Everyone behind him was even more shocked. Instantly, killing a nightmare on his own was already ridiculous, but the fact that he was a mage who did it through melee combat was even more absurd. At that moment, the nightmare's body melted into a black stone, which began fading away at a visible speed. Zuoyo recognized it immediately. The symbol on the black stone was exactly the same as the symbol on the doorframe of the house. But something else bothered Joe even more. Nightmare Village was clearly strange. He had killed the nightmare through melee combat, yet the system had not rewarded him with any free attribute points. By the next day, news that Joe had single-handedly killed a nightmare had already spread through the class. Now, quite a few students wanted to join Joe's team. But just then, villagers suddenly walked out from every direction and surrounded them. The village chief declared that all of them would be taken to the stake and burned, so the flames could cleanse the sins from their bodies. If anyone dared to resist, they would be killed on the spot. Hearing this, Ma-Fei stepped forward and asked the village chief if there had been some kind of misunderstanding. But at that moment, a bad thought rose in Joe's mind. The number of villagers seemed almost the same as the number of students in their class. On top of that, every villager looked like they were around the same age. This did not look like a normal village at all. Could it really be what he was thinking? The village chief then told them that last night, a nightmare had died inside one of their houses. That meant they must have broken the rules of Nightmare Village, so the great guardian spirit had sent the nightmare to punish them. Therefore, the village chief had decided to follow the guardian spirit's will, capture them all, and cleanse their sins with fire. Ma-Fei immediately asked if there was still any way to make up for it. The village chief said that receiving the guardian spirit's forgiveness would not be easy. The sinner had to remain outside the house alone when night fell. Ma-Fei understood instantly. This so-called forgiveness was nothing but an excuse. If even hiding inside a house was not completely safe, staying outside would be even worse. Hearing this, Joe stepped forward from behind them. I was the one who killed the guardian spirit's nightmare. Tonight, I'll stay here and wait for nightfall. Seeing the conflicted look on Ma-Fei's face, Joe comforted him and said, "Don't worry, Monitor. I already have a rough idea of how to leave this place. This is the perfect chance to test it." Before long, the villagers chained Joe to a cross. After the villagers left, the students all walked over to him. They were curious about the method Joe had mentioned for escaping this place. Joe said it was only a guess for now. If he managed to verify it tonight, he would tell them. In the blink of an eye, night fell. Nightmare Village at night was truly terrifying. Thick fog rose all around, making it nearly impossible for Joe to see his surroundings. Even so, he could faintly sense a familiar aura. Then, a strange creature with 3 eyes suddenly appeared behind Joe with a sharp whoosh. But almost immediately, a skill flew in from a distance. Sand binding wrapped tightly around the creature's body. Ma-Fei also rushed out from the front and began fighting the monster head-on. At the same time, Zuoyo and Zhao Ziye took the chance to run over and help Joe break free. Unfortunately, both of them were support-type classes. This kind of chain needed an offensive class like Ma-Fei to cut it with a sword. Joe simply told them to step back. In the next second, Joe tore the chains apart with brute force. His strength stat had already reached a terrifying level, and the reason he had done all this was to lure out the monster in front of him. At that moment, Ma-Fei had gained a slight advantage in his fight against the monster. As his ultimate skill came crashing down, the monster was left with only 5 HP. Just as Ma-Fei was about to step forward and finish it off, Joe's figure flashed forward and stole the final hit first. Ma-Fei almost lost it. He had fought with everything he had just to bring that monster down to low health. And now Joe had stolen the kill right out from under him, so of course he was furious. In truth, Joe had only done it to test a theory. And sure enough, after killing this nightmare monster, the system still did not reward him with any attribute points. In the next instant, 2 more nightmare monsters charged toward their position. Joe turned to the others and said, "Get back inside the house first. Don't waste too much time on the nightmares. I think I've already figured out how to clear Nightmare Village." The next morning, the village chief stormed over in a rage, scolding them for breaking their promise and killing another nightmare that had been sent to watch over the sinner last night. This time, no matter what they said, he was going to tie them all to the stake. Joe stepped forward and asked him, "Chief Wogan, are you sure you are really native villagers of Nightmare Village?" Then, Joe's expression darkened as he continued, "Last night, I figured out the hidden truth behind this village. You so-called villagers of Nightmare Village. You are actually the class that was wiped out in this dungeon all those years ago. From the moment we entered, we've been trapped inside an illusion. That's why we couldn't exit the dungeon. The village chief refused to accept Joe's words. To him, everything Joe had just said was nothing but a made-up story, because Joe had no proof. Joe then took a faintly glowing jade stone from his pocket. "This guardian stone is my proof." The moment the village chief saw it, cold sweat poured down his face. The guardian stone was the sacred object granted to them by the great guardian spirit, protecting them from attacks at night. If anyone tampered with it, the guardian spirit would surely bring disaster upon the entire village. But Joe said coldly, "This isn't some holy stone protecting you. This entire illusion is built from these black stones and the mysterious symbols carved into them. That guardian spirit you worship has been lying to you from the very beginning. Its goal was to trap you here forever. So, as long as we destroy these black stones, this illusion will start to crack." Joe then raised his hand slightly, and the others followed him, crushing the black stones in their hands. About 2.5 seconds later, a sharp crack rang out across the sky, and a massive fissure split open above them. Immediately after that, all the villagers remembered everything. They were the very class that had gotten lost inside Nightmare Village decades ago. The system then announced, "A player has discovered the core secret of Nightmare Village and successfully awakened all villagers. Rewards will now be calculated based on each player's mission rating." However, after everyone else left, Joe's group of 5 still remained inside the dungeon. A system panel then appeared. "Congratulations to 5 players for destroying the Nightmare Blackstones and triggering an E-rank hidden mission. Find the hidden dungeon item, Nightmare Heart." Outside the dungeon, their teacher was stunned and overjoyed. They had actually rolled the Nightmare Village dungeon, and they had even cleared it safely. However, 5 students were still inside, so the teacher guessed that Joe and the others had probably triggered a hidden mission. If that was really the case, then as long as they completed it, they could basically choose any top university in the country. But inside the dungeon, the situation was far from good. More than a dozen nightmares appeared at once, surrounding Joe's group. Joe told the other 4 teammates to handle the nightmares on one side. As for the other side, he would take it alone. Since the illusion of Nightmare Village had already been broken, Joe could finally earn free attribute points again by killing nightmares through melee combat. After a few exchanges, he even got a mage item to drop. An F-rank fairy necklace. Unique effect. Increases skill damage by 5%. For an apprentice-level player, F-rank equipment was already pretty decent. But Joe could not use skills right now, so it was not very useful to him. He handed the necklace to his childhood friend, Yang Xiandi. After that, the group continued deeper into the dungeon to search for the mission item, Nightmare Heart. But before they could even take 2 steps, the ground suddenly split open with a thunderous boom. The group fell straight underground. The place was filled with a disgusting stench. Yang Shangdi guessed that they might have fallen into some kind of sewer. But soon, Zhao Ziyu found the source of the smell. Right in front of them lay a strange monster. It looked like it belonged to the same species as the nightmares, and that foul odor was coming from its breath. The system informed them that this was the rare boss of the dungeon, Nightmare King. For now, it was asleep. If they woke it up, they would be hunted by the Nightmare King. The sight gave everyone the same thought. Maybe the Nightmare Heart was actually the Nightmare King's heart. But killing the Nightmare King right now was almost impossible. As the dungeon boss, it had 65 attack. A single normal hit could easily smash them to death. So the safest option was to find a way out without waking the Nightmare King. Joe, however, believed they might still have a chance to kill it. His strength had already reached 101. With his passive skill, Raw Strength Works Miracles, plus the Skeleton King's Ring, he could instantly take out 1/3 of the Nightmare King's HP. If the follow-up attacks landed on its weak point, there was a real chance to kill it. The risk, however, was enormous. One mistake, and the Nightmare King would wipe them out instantly. Joe then explained his plan to the team. Although the Nightmare King's stat panel looked terrifying, it had one obvious weakness: its defense. "So, I need you to help me draw its attention. If you can do that, I'm confident I can kill this Nightmare King." After hearing him out, his teammates chose to trust him and put their fate in his hands. After all, they had made it this far only because they had followed Joe's commands. After resting for about 2.5 minutes, they stepped forward and carefully observed the Nightmare King's body for weak points. The first attack would be critical, so they had to find its most vulnerable spot, and the system had already said that as long as they did not attack the Nightmare King, it would not wake up. A moment later, Joe noticed a faint glow on the Nightmare King's body. That spot happened to be right near its heart. So Joe guessed that the glowing area was probably the Nightmare King's weak point. He then put on the Skeleton King's ring and raised his staff. Then, he smashed it down hard. onto the Nightmare King. His teammates were completely stunned. None of them had expected an apprentice-level necromancer to deal a terrifying 508 physical damage. A system prompt immediately appeared. Player Zhou Yu has shattered the Nightmare Heart during battle. Current hidden mission has been upgraded to an A-rank mission. Kill the Nightmare King. At that moment, the Nightmare King fully awakened because of Zhou's strike. Seeing this, Zhou immediately called out to his teammates and told them to follow the original plan. Ma Fei charged first and took the front line, while Yang Xiangdi and the others stayed behind him, applying buffs and providing ranged support. But even though the Nightmare King had been hit with an attack reduction buff, and even with Zhuo Yu's Paladin Shield, one casual strike from it still shaved nearly 30 HP off Ma Fei. Meanwhile, Zhou was already behind the Nightmare King, waiting for his chance. As a blur flashed across his vision, Zhou swept his staff sideways and smashed it into the Nightmare King's abdomen. A warning panel quickly popped up from the system. Boss Nightmare King's HP is critically low. Skill Nightmare Realm is about to activate. The Nightmare King's body shook, and a black-red glow spread out from within it. This was an area of effect damage over time skill. While being cast, it would damage all enemy units and could not be blocked. It seemed that the confusion Wogan and the others had suffered earlier was probably caused by this very skill. Zhou immediately swung his hand and forcefully interrupted the Nightmare King's casting state. Then, with Zhao Ziyue's buff supporting him, Zhou launched the final strike at the Nightmare King. With a ding, the system congratulated Zhou for completing the first kill achievement of the Nightmare Village boss, and rewarded him with 30 free attribute points. The system would now rate each player's performance and distribute rewards. Player Zhao Ziyue received a D-rank dungeon rating and was rewarded with the D-rank skillbook Spring Breeze over Willows. Player Zhuo Yu received a C-rank dungeon rating and was rewarded with the D-rank skillbook Foreign Armor Counter. Player Yang Xiangdi received a C-rank dungeon rating and was rewarded with the skillbook Earth Burst. Player Ma Fei received a C-rank dungeon rating and was rewarded with the D-rank skillbook A Sword Across Worlds. Player Zhou Yu received an A-rank dungeon rating and was rewarded with the B-rank skillbook Withering Spell. Zhou still could not use the skillbook for now, so he could only hope that the soul core dropped by the boss would give him something useful. As a flash of light appeared, player Zhou Yu successfully opened a B-rank equipment item, Dragon Piercing Sword. Unique effect: increases attack by 100 and ignores 30% of the target's armor. Required class: Warrior. Zhou looked at the sword in his hand and felt helpless. It was definitely a great weapon, but he was a mage, so he could not use it at all. So Zhou casually tossed the sword to Ma Fei behind him. Since Ma Fei's class leaned toward the warrior system, it was perfect for him. As for Zhou's current stat panel, only his strength made him feel satisfied. Compared to that, his HP was still way too low, sitting at only around 70. Because of his passive restriction, he could not add points to other attributes. That meant he had to find another way to protect himself. Then, the system informed them that they had completed all hidden missions. They were about to be teleported back to the real world. After Zhou and the others passed through the teleportation gate and returned to reality, their teacher was practically glowing with excitement. His guess had been right. Zhou's group had really fallen into Nightmare Village's hidden mission. This was huge. After completing a hidden mission, getting into one of the top universities was basically guaranteed. About 2.5 minutes later, special recruitment teachers from the top universities arrived one after another. Although completing a hidden mission in the exam dungeon was already enough to attract the attention of elite universities, the process still required a simple test first. This test was meant to verify each student's class and whether their corresponding talent abilities met the admission standards. Hearing that, Zhou felt a little helpless, because if they needed to verify class abilities, then as a necromancer who could not use skills, he would probably be eliminated on the spot. The first one to take the test was the class monitor, Ma Fei. His class was a sword cultivator with a B-rank talent. The skill he used, A Sword Across Worlds, actually pierced through Teacher Pei's defense, and Teacher Pei was a mid-tier spear cultivator. Even though defense was not his main focus, he was still level 25. Sword cultivators truly deserved their reputation as the class with the highest attack power. Next up was Zhao Ziyu, the healer. Although she was only level 4, she had already mastered the group healing skill, Spring Breeze. On the other side, Zhuo You's combat power was just as impressive. The defensive shield she created could not only absorb damage, but also reflect a small portion of it back. Yang Xiangdi's ability was even harder to believe. He could instantly cast Earthburst without any visible casting sign. To reach that level of control, a player usually had to surpass the apprentice rank. But Yang Xiangdi was only level 5. For a moment, Teacher Pei could not help but wonder about their homeroom teacher. Raising 5 young geniuses in a single year was not normal. Maybe this teacher was secretly a retired powerhouse. A moment later, Zhou Yu was the only one left who had not taken the test. When Teacher Peng heard that Zhou had already reached level 7, his face filled with disbelief. Not only had a legendary hidden class, Necromancer, appeared before him, but Zhou was also 2 whole levels higher than the other 4. Teacher Pei, standing nearby, was also looking forward to seeing how powerful Zhou's summoned undead would be. But in the next second, Zhou suddenly shot forward. Just as Zhou's fist was about to fall, Teacher Pei felt a flash of disdain. In his eyes, Zhou clearly lacked real combat experience. In an actual fight, no one would let a mage walk right up to their face to cast a spell. But the next second, Zhou's fist slammed hard into Teacher Pei's jaw. What happened next made everyone on the scene cry out in shock, because Zhou's punch had directly knocked down a level 25 mid-tier expert. Even Teacher Peng, who had come with Teacher Pei for recruitment, looked speechless. He even wondered if Teacher Pei had deliberately acted weak to let Zhou pass through the back door. After all, everyone knew that necromancers have the weakest physical bodies among all classes. But inside, Teacher Pei was already shaken to the core. If he had reacted even a little slower to that punch, he might have passed out on the spot. Zhou then said apologetically, "Sorry, teachers. Because of my talent, I mainly train physical strength. That's why I hope to join the body cultivation major under Capital University's warrior department." Teacher Peng replied that joining a major outside one's own class system had never happened before, so he needed to submit an application to the principal first. About 2.5 minutes later, Ji Pingyang, the principal of Capital University, appeared before them to a video projection. He said he understood Zhou's situation. Kyoto University would welcome Zhou at any time, and if the other 4 students were interested, they could join as well. Zhou then walked up to Ji Pingyang and asked, "Old principal, do you know my father, Chao Anqing?" Ji Pingyang immediately understood. No wonder Zhou had looked so familiar the first time he saw him. It turned out that both of Zhou's parents had once been his students, but thinking about it now, he had not seen them in more than 10 years. Before Zhou's parents disappeared, however, they had once mentioned a personal dungeon to Ji Pingyang. So, inside Zhou's personal dungeon, there might be something his parents had left behind. About a week later, Zhou appeared in the inner world before a dungeon portal. He planned to open his personal dungeon early. If he cleared it before entering university, he could receive a large amount of resource rewards. More importantly, the dungeon might contain information left behind by his parents. With a ding, the system announced that the personal dungeon they had drawn was the 10,000 Poisons Cave. Preliminary information. Legend says that in southeastern Tian, there was an ancient and evil tribe. Its people were violent and vicious, and they were highly skilled at refining poisonous insects. These insects would reproduce inside the victim's body, and their offspring would continuously devour the host's flesh until the host died. Mission requirement: locate the evil tribe and eliminate all poisonous insects inside the dungeon. After reviewing all the information, Zhou stepped into the dungeon portal. Reminder: the 10,000 Poisons Cave requires 5 players to open, so the system will match Zhou with 3 additional teammates. Soon, they met the other 3. Their classes were 2 fire mages, Fan Yuan and Fan Xun, and 1 water mage, Long Cheng. A moment later, the group arrived at the first checkpoint of the dungeon. A stone gate appeared before them. Long Cheng, the water mage in the team, strode forward and launched a skill at the gate. However, the system displayed that the attack was invalid. The stone gate probably had magic immunity. It seemed they could only open it by following the hints written on it. Zhou looked at the stone gate and fell into thought. Did this gate really only have magic immunity? Before long, Fang Wan roughly figured out the answer. But on the other side, Zhou had already relied on his passive skill, Raw Strength Works Miracles, and forced the stone gate open. The 3 new teammates were left speechless. Was this not supposed to be a personal dungeon for mages? What kind of person was this guy? Honestly, even Zhou himself had not expected this. He had only wanted to test it by pushing with a little force. After passing through the stone gate, another gate blocked their path. The difference was that the ground here was covered with blood-red spider lilies. But before they could take 2 steps forward, dark purple poison mist appeared on everyone's body. The system announced that they had entered a poisoned state. During this state, they would lose 3 HP every minute until death. Joe guessed that the poison mist was coming from the spider lilies. So they had to open this stone gate quickly and leave the area. But this stone gate was also blown open by Joe with a single easy punch. This time, his teammates' eyes went wide. These puzzle gates were clearly meant to test a mage's thinking and reaction speed, but now, it seemed none of that trouble was necessary. Soon, the group appeared in a wide, empty valley. The system then announced that they had completed the dungeon's first requirement. Find the evil tribe. 10,000 Poisons Cave. Just then, a dark-skinned little girl dressed in strange clothing appeared before them. She asked if they had come from outside. She also saw that they had been poisoned by the spider lilies and said they had to follow her back to 10,000 Spirits Cave for treatment as soon as possible. If the poison sank too deep, it would be difficult to fully remove from their bodies. Joe quietly studied the little girl. What exactly was this 10,000 Spirits Cave she mentioned? Still, for now, the best choice was to follow her and see. A moment later, the group followed the little girl to 10,000 Spirits Cave. The so-called antidote, 5 poison soup, was actually a pot of mushroom soup brewed with all kinds of poisonous insects and toxins. But after drinking it, the effect was obvious. The spider lily poison in Joe's body had completely disappeared. However, after everyone drank the 5 poison soup, the little girl's parents immediately told them to leave. 10,000 Spirits Cave did not welcome outsiders. But after the little girl strongly insisted, Joe and the others were allowed to stay there for one night. Late that night, the little girl walked alone toward the altar. Tonight was a rare full moon night that only came once every 100 years. Whenever this night arrived, 10,000 Spirits Cave would hold a ritual to bless its people. But the living sacrifices used in a ritual were actually humans. In other words, humans who did not belong to 10,000 Spirits Cave. In an instant, their flesh and blood were completely devoured by swarms of insects. Joe and the others, who had secretly followed her, saw everything. This 10,000 Spirits Cave was definitely deeply connected to the poisonous insects. There were too many poisonous insects here, and many tribespeople had come to attend the ritual. Joe decided they should head back first and come up with a detailed plan. Meanwhile, at the center of the altar, the chief of 10,000 Spirits Cave sensed the presence of outsiders nearby. She immediately ordered her people to capture them, saying they would make perfect sacrifices for the Insect King. Joe's group rushed back to the little girl's house as quickly as possible. Fang Yuan was already covered in cold sweat. If the tribespeople found out that their purpose here was to eliminate the poisonous insects, they would definitely be captured and offered as sacrifices. Just then, Joe heard a rustling sound outside the door. Countless insects began crawling in from every direction. Feng Yuan reacted first and activated his defensive skill, Blazing Fire Barrier. As Joe swung his staff to drive away the swarm, he realized something. These insects were too weak, so he could not gain any new attribute points from them. Otherwise, this swarm would have been the perfect experience pack for him. At the same time, Yang Shandi used a combo skill to slow down the movement of the insects. A moment later, a figure slowly walked over. He said that he'd originally only wanted to let them taste the power of 10,000 Poisons Cave, but he never expected them to dare kill the insects worshipped by the tribe as divine beings. Now, they had only one fate left, becoming food for the swarm. The figure before them was an ordinary NPC of 10,000 Poisons Cave named Giant Scorpion. Although he was only a normal rank NPC, his stats were far above everyone in the team except Joe. At that moment, a thought quietly formed in Joe's mind. A beginner hidden dungeon should not be designed to be this difficult. Maybe there was some hidden speedrun method here as well. Then Joe shot forward like a cannonball and appeared in front of Giant Scorpion. With just one punch, he blasted Giant Scorpion away. Giant Scorpion felt utterly humiliated and immediately entered a powerful state called Insect Devour. Everyone looked shocked because his stats had risen again by a large margin. Yet, only 2.5 seconds later, Giant Scorpion was kneeling before Joe like a beaten dog. Joe told him to be honest and explain what that ritual was really about. Giant Scorpion obediently revealed the secret of 10,000 Poisons Cave. It turned out that they had once made a contract with the Insect Queen. On every full moon night, they had to offer fresh flesh and blood as sacrifices. The ancient Viewstone Well was the Insect Queen's nest, where she lived and bred her offspring. His words instantly made Yang Shandi realize something. The reason the little girl's parents had helped remove the poison from their bodies might be because they had already treated them as sacrifices for the Insect Queen's next ritual. Joe then asked the question in his mind. Why did the little girl call this tribe 10,000 Spirits Cave, while the others called it 10,000 Poisons Cave? Giant Scorpion looked confused at first. He said the children of the tribe had been sent away early to help prepare the ritual. But soon, he thought of another possibility. Their tribe chief often disguised herself as a little girl. After Giant Scorpion finished speaking, Joe raised his fist and smashed it into his head. With a ding, the system announced that Joe had completed the first kill achievement for killing an NPC through melee combat, rewarding him with an S-rank one-time item, Sage's Protection. Once equipped, it could block one fatal hit. Joe was instantly excited. An S-rank item was the highest grade item in the inner world. At this point, panic began spreading through the team. If even an ordinary NPC from 10,000 Poisons Cave was this powerful, then if the chief personally made a move, they would not be able to handle it. Joe reassured them. The mission only required them to eliminate the poisonous insects. There was no need to fight the tribespeople of 10,000 Poisons Cave to the bitter end. When the time came, they just needed to find a chance to destroy the ancient well. When the group returned along the same path, the ritual had already ended. To their surprise, the little girl's parents had collapsed beside the ancient well. Under Zhou Yu's command, his teammates launched their strongest damage skills at the well at the same time. With a thunderous rumble, a massive hole suddenly appeared in the ground ahead. Yang Shangdi immediately felt that something was wrong. With damage that powerful, the insect swarm should not have survived. And yet the system still had not displayed a mission complete notification. Just then, a cold voice suddenly came from behind them. The figure of Shundong, the chief of 10,000 Poisons Cave, slowly emerged from the darkness. Zhou immediately exposed her identity. "You're the little girl who helped us detox, aren't you?" Hearing this, Shundong instantly understood one thing. Since Zhou and the others had made it here, the giant scorpion she sent after them must have failed. As she spoke, her figure flickered, and she transformed back into the little girl again. Then the corners of her mouth tightened slightly, showing a helpless expression. She said that what Zhou's group had just done had completely enraged the insect queen, so she had no choice but to sacrifice them to her. Zhou cut her off immediately. A chief who won't even spare her own people doesn't need to pretend she's kind. Shundong's mask fell away at once. Even if those people were her biological parents, once they became obstacles on her path to power, she would remove them without hesitation. The moment she said that, anger surged through Zhou. She had dared to insult the word parents right in front of him. Zhou had not seen his father or mother in far too long. Seeing this, Shundong told Zhou not to be angry. After all, she would soon send him to reunite with his parents. In the next second, countless insects gathered together in a dense swarm. At the same time, the elder of 10,000 Poisons Cave, Mad Python, drew the firepower of the other 4 teammates away on the other side. Zhou kept swinging his staff, driving away the insects in front of him. He knew very well that if this became a battle of attrition, he would not last long. But now he had Sage's Protection, an item that could block one fatal hit. That meant he could afford to gamble. Zhou immediately raised his fist and charged straight at Shundong. Shundong watched Zhou's body being swallowed by the swarm and smiled proudly. She was absolutely confident that these insects could stop him. But in the next instant, Zhou's figure blasted through the swarm and tore straight through her body. A bloody wound opened across Shundong's abdomen. She immediately began chanting under her breath, and the wound slowly started to heal. The system announced that Shundong had entered the insect devour state. But Zhou could not understand one thing. Shundong's system rating was rare rank. So why were her stats even lower than giant scorpions, despite him being only a normal rank NPC? In the instant Zhou lost focus, Shundong's fist slammed heavily into him. That punch directly wiped out more than half of Zhou's HP bar. If he took one more hit like that, Sage's Protection would probably trigger immediately. Meanwhile, Yang Shengdi and the others had also fallen into a hard fight. As an elder of 10,000 Poisons Cave, Mad Python was extremely powerful. Even the combined attacks of all 4 teammates could not deal any real damage to him. Mad Python found them laughably arrogant. Trash like them actually dared to come here and act wild. But very quickly, his expression darkened. His body had been tightly wrapped by a mass of red sand. As an overwhelming force burst out, Mad Python's body vanished before everyone's eyes. At the spot where Yang Shangdi had been standing, a handsome and elegant figure appeared. Everyone stared in shock, wondering when this good-looking guy had shown up. But when he spoke, the voice that came out was Yang Shangdi's. Even Yang Shangdi himself had no idea what had happened. In that instant, some mysterious power burned away all the fat on his body, and his spirit stats skyrocketed by nearly 300 points. Spirit was directly tied to skill power. Nearly 300 spirit points was already close to the level of a mid-tier mage. Zhou then told Yang Shangdi to fire his strongest earth burst directly at him. Yang Shangdi hesitated at once. If he did that, Joe would be blown up, along with Shindong. But thinking back on everything that had happened, they had only survived this far by following Joe's orders. So Yang Shengdi chose to believe that Joe had a way to escape. With that thought, Yang Shengdi unleashed Earthburst at full power without hesitation. Shindong finally looked panicked. She did not want to die here so easily. Joe only laughed coldly and locked his arms around her body. Sorry, it's already too late. At least this way, I'll have someone to keep me company on the road. A violent explosion erupted around them. Thick smoke from the blast instantly swallowed both Joe and Shindong. A moment later, the system displayed a string of notifications. Fatal damage detected. Sage's protection has been triggered. Class holder Joe Yu has successfully negated this instance of damage. At the same time, because Joe showed the courage to move toward death while facing death itself, the system rewarded him with an A-rank passive skill, Mighty Contract. Its effect, every 50 points of extra HP grants 1 point of strength. At the same time, every 1 point of strength grants 10 points of extra HP. When calculated properly, this passive skill was almost comparable to S-rank. HP and strength would stack and boost each other. Joe currently had 166 strength, which meant he had instantly gained 1,660 extra HP. For him, this was practically a double-level upgrade. Yang Shangdi then walked over with a confused expression. It seemed Shundong still had not died, because the system's settlement window had not appeared. Then, Sundong's figure slowly emerged from the thick fog. The corners of her mouth curled upward, as she let out a cold, sinister laugh. It seemed she had underestimated their strength. From this moment on, she would go all out in the battle ahead. As she spoke, Shundong transformed into a terrifying creature with a human face and an insect body. Joe guessed that this was probably Shindong's true original form. Her stats had now risen by a large margin. Then the system displayed a red warning window. Boss of 10,000 Poisons Cave has been strengthened by an unknown force. Combat power now far exceeds beginner difficulty. Players may choose to leave the dungeon. Hearing this, Yang Shangdi immediately thought about leaving. Dungeon rewards could always be earned another time, but if they accidentally died here, everything would be over. But Joe did not change his mind. The old principal had once told him that he had to clear his personal dungeon because it might contain clues about his parents' disappearance. Sundong looked at him with contempt. She no longer believed Joe could hurt her body. In an instant, Joe and Shundong clashed again. After several heavy punches, Joe took a considerable amount of damage. But inside, Shundong was shocked. Before this, one casual punch from her had nearly killed Joe instantly. Yet now, even after merging with the Insect Queen, she was starting to struggle against him. And if she was not mistaken, Joe's class should have been a mage-type class. But his melee damage was clearly even higher than hers. Thinking of this, Shundong could not help asking, "Are you from Baizé?" Before she could say anything else, Joe swung the staff in his hand. "What are you mumbling about? Don't think you can play crazy and get away with this." After several more exchanges, Joe raised his staff and smashed it heavily into Shundong's body. In her final moment, Shundong finally realized something. For one brief instant, she had sensed a familiar aura from Joe. It came from the powerful figure who had once created her. Then the system announced that Joe had successfully killed an unknown creature through melee combat, rewarding him with 15 free attribute points. The 10,000 Poisons Cave dungeon clearing mission was complete. Player Long Chang received an F-rank dungeon rating. Players Feng Yuan and Feng Xun both received E-rank ratings. Player Yang Xingdi received an A-rank rating. As the greatest contributor, Joe received an S-rank rating. The system rewarded him with an A-rank skill book, Gate of Akka, and raised his level to 10. But that was still far from enough. It only meant that Joe was about to step into the beginner tier player ranks of the inner world. The boss kill reward was a B-rank piece of equipment called Mad Spider Armor. It could increase the wearer's HP by 800, perfectly matching Joe's passive skill, Mighty Contract. Besides that, there was also a cube-shaped object. Its description said that a mysterious power was sealed inside it. A moment later, the cube suddenly shot into Joe's body. Then the system announced that Joe had obtained character attribute abilities from targets within a 10-level gap of himself. Joe's pupils constricted in shock. He never expected the cube to choose its own host. And aside from giving him a huge boost in attribute points, it also came with an unknown ability waiting to be unlocked. Just then, the guide spirit, Elaine, slowly walked over. She told them that they had successfully completed the personal dungeon. As the unique reward for the first clear, she would increase everyone's spirit stat by 20%. Joe was instantly speechless. Although the reward sounded extremely generous, his starting spirit stat was 0. A 20% increase meant absolutely nothing to him. Time quickly moved to the next day. At that moment, class monitor Ma Fei was shocked to learn that Joe had also reached level 10. He was so surprised, because warrior department personal dungeons were usually far more common than mage department personal dungeons. Because of that, warriors often outleveled mages in the early stage. But now, Joe had somehow reached the same level as him. What made everyone even more curious was Yang Xiangdi. After just one day apart, he looked like a completely different person. Then, Zuoyo shared a piece of news. All 5 of them had already received early admission to Capital University. But they still had not signed up for this year's Inner World Grand Exam. The Inner World Grand Exam was essentially a deep-level talent selection test. Even students who had already received early admission would usually sign up for that year's exam. Their goal was to become the top scorer, because earning that title brought both fame and fortune, along with an extra A-rank item. And this year, the officials seemed to be going all in. Rumor had it that the top scorer's reward was an S-rank item. After some discussion, Joe and the other 4 all chose to participate in this year's Inner World Grand Exam. After all, S-rank items were priceless treasures that could not be bought even with money. Later, as Joe walked home, 2 figures suddenly appeared in front of him with a sharp whoosh. Joe's eyes narrowed slightly as he asked, "Do you need something?" They did not hide their purpose. They directly asked if he was Zhou Yu, the mage who had killed Shundong in the 10,000 Poisons Cave dungeon. Hearing this, Joe had a rough idea of what was going on. He remembered that before Shundong died, she had mentioned the name Bai Zhe. If his guess was right, these 2 were probably from that side. After thinking it over, Joe casually made up a lie. "You've got the wrong person. My name is Ma Fei, not Zhou Yu." However, they clearly did not believe him. They walked forward, trying to restrain his body. Seeing this, Joe immediately used a shoulder charge. He sent one of them flying back. The other man was instantly horrified. They were assassins who specialized in countering mages. Yet Joe had easily crippled one of them with physical strength alone. From that perspective, maybe he really wasn't lying. After all, mages were famously weak in the body. The man then pressed his hands together and apologized to Joe, saying that he had been too anxious and had accidentally gotten the name wrong. He told Joe that he was only a low-ranking member of the organization, ranked somewhere above 7,000, so getting intelligence wrong was quite normal for him. This Bai Zhe organization was truly not simple. Even a level 18 player could only rank above 7,000. Since that was the case, Joe decided to let them go for now. Otherwise, he would definitely draw even stronger enemies. With that in mind, Zhou Yu waved his hand, saying it was no big deal, then turned and left. After returning home, Joe immediately went online and started searching for information about Bai Zhe. Bai Zhe was a divine beast from ancient legends. Its entire body was snow white, with flame-like markings on its limbs. In ancient times, it was seen as an auspicious beast that could drive away ghosts and monsters. But beyond that, Joe could not find any useful information. Since Bai Zhe's people could already intercept him on the street, that meant even his home was no longer safe. In that case, Joe had no choice but to participate in the Inner World Grand Exam. Every candidate who entered the exam would receive strict protection, and once the exam ended, it would be time for him to report to Capital University, so his safety would be even less of a concern. After all, Ji Pingyang was known as the #1 sword cultivator in the inner world. Then Joe condensed the cube's form from inside his body. Even now, he still had not figured out the cube's other unknown ability. Suddenly, Joe thought of a possibility. Maybe this cube was a clue his parents had left behind to help him find them. Meanwhile, on the other side, the 2 professional assassins returned to their organization and reported that the intelligence had been wrong. The target's class was not Mage, because he had nearly crippled them with a single punch. 2.5 days passed quickly. Joe went to the office, hoping his homeroom teacher could help him with something. He wanted to know whether his teacher recognized the cube in his hand. After examining it for a moment, his teacher said the cube had been sealed by some kind of power. Without the password, the only way to unlock it was with an unsealing key. Only then could the seal be removed while keeping the item inside intact. Otherwise, his teacher would have punched it open just now. Joe asked where he could get an unsealing key. Before this, he had never even heard the name. Soon, Joe teleported to the city of machines his teacher had mentioned. Because artificial machines once awakened their own consciousness, a war between humans and machines had broken out here. In the end, both sides reached a peace agreement. And humans set aside part of their living zone for robots to survive. The human territory was called the City of Machines, while the robot territory was called the Machine Kingdom. It was also the legendary E-rank dungeon known as the Machine Kingdom. Joe needed to find City Lord Hua Jun here and accept a hidden mission from him. Only then could he obtain the legendary unsealing key. At the same time, Hua Jun was also a famous human biology professor. Just then, Joe noticed several thugs ganging up on an old man. Seeing this, Joe walked over and warned them to bow and apologize to the old man immediately. One of them was instantly annoyed. It was the first time anyone had dared to disrespect him like this. But in the next second, Joe had already taken a punching stance, and that man's body had already flown 100 meters away. The scene scared his companions so badly that they began trembling. They immediately bowed deeply to the old man 10 times in a row. The old man then walked over and thanked Joe. Joe said, "No need to thank me, but do you know how I can find City Lord Hua Jun?" Hearing this, the old man froze slightly. He happened to have a way to let Joe meet City Lord Hua Jun. Before long, Joe followed the old man to the front of a castle. But in the blink of an eye, the old man disappeared. Joe did not think too much about it. Maybe the old man had something urgent to handle and left without saying goodbye. However, when Joe pushed open the door, he saw something unbelievable. The thugs from the street and the old man were all inside the castle. It turned out that the old man was actually City Lord Hua Jun, the very person Joe had been looking for. And those thugs were actually the strongest guards at his side. The reason he staged that whole act was because he had been trying to find a powerful enough helper. Now, it seemed he had found the person he was looking for. That person was Joe. Hua Jun then made a request. If Joe could complete this task, he would hand over the unsealing key. Tomorrow, City Lord Hua Jun would hold an academic seminar to announce his research results in the field of machinery and organic life. But behind the scenes, certain organizations were planning to steal those results. Joe's mission was to defeat the king of the Machine Kingdom and destroy his mechanical heart. Time quickly moved to the next day. Joe arrived at the academic research hall and waited for the mysterious organization to appear. About 2.5 hours later, a figure crashed down from the sky with a thunderous boom. He looked like a synthetic human, and he was probably one of the mysterious organization members Hua Jun had mentioned. His strength was indeed terrifying. Even all the guards on site working together could not pose any threat to him. At the same time, a mysterious man appeared on the other side. Without saying a word, he used a strange skill and captured City Lord Hua Jun. However, all of this was part of Hua Jun's plan. Seeing that everyone seemed to have lost, the synthetic human became arrogant. He told them to stop struggling because his body had already been mechanically modified, and there was no way they could defeat him. Joe stepped forward and cut him off. In that case, Joe wanted to see whether his body was really that tough. Before the man could react, Joe threw a heavy punch straight at his body. With just one punch, Joe almost emptied his entire HP bar. The synthetic human stared in disbelief. His body had personally been modified by the king, yet a human had still punched straight through his biomechanical flesh. After that, Joe followed a certain signal to another location. This was something he had agreed on with City Lord Hua Jun beforehand. Hua Jun would deliberately allow himself to be captured, then leave a special pheromone trail along the way. That way, Joe could use it to locate the Machine Kingdom's base. Meanwhile, on the other side, the mysterious man revealed why he had captured City Lord Hua Jun. They had developed a mechanical heart that could be turned biological, but something had gone wrong with it. At some point, it had become a mechanical life form that needed to devour living beings. Under normal circumstances, it had to consume at least 3 lives every day. That was why they wanted Hua Jun to come and solve the problem. This placed Hua Jun in a dilemma. If he helped them repair the heart, more humans would be transformed into synthetic beings in the future. But if he did nothing, people would continue to be devoured by it. On the other side, Joe had almost finished dealing with the low-level robots guarding the city. What surprised him was that killing robots also gave him free attribute points. Before long, Joe arrived at the room where City Lord Hua Jun was being held. Hearing the commotion, the mysterious man looked toward Joe. He welcomed Joe to the legendary Machine Kingdom. He said he had seen Joe's combat performance through the surveillance footage. If Joe was willing to submit to them and undergo mechanical modification, then Joe would definitely become the strongest synthetic human in the world. Hua Jun then told Joe that the heart in front of him was his mission target. As long as he destroyed it, the mission would be complete. Joe casually punched the mysterious man away first. Then he walked up to the mechanical heart. After that, Joe tightened every muscle in his body and began throwing punch after punch. 2.5 seconds later, the system announced that Joe had successfully destroyed the mechanical heart, Marta. At this moment, the mysterious man, who had just caught his breath, immediately changed his attitude. He said that although he was the king of the Machine Kingdom, the true ruler of the Machine Kingdom was not him. It was the Mechanical Empress. The Mechanical Empress had already learned that Joe destroyed the mechanical heart, Marta. But if Joe chose to join the Machine Kingdom, she would pardon all of his crimes. Joe was a little surprised. From City Lord Huajun's tone earlier, this mysterious man should have been the king he mentioned. So why had an empress suddenly appeared out of nowhere? After thinking about it, Joe decided to follow him and see this so-called Mechanical Empress. On the way, Joe waited until the mysterious man was not paying attention. Then, he threw a heavy punch and emptied his HP bar. Because Joe had almost forgotten that Huajin's mission also included killing the king of the Machine Kingdom. Sure enough, in the next second, Joe received the mission reward, the unsealing key. At the same time, the experience points from killing the mysterious man raised Joe to level 11. This meant he was now officially a beginner tier mage. Joe guessed that the Mechanical Empress the mysterious man had mentioned should be up ahead because he could sense a powerful energy fluctuation in that direction. That was why he had dealt with the mysterious man early. But in the next second, Joe felt a little regret. There was actually a password door here. However, Joe did not stay troubled for long. With a sharp, cracking sound, the metal door in front of him was smashed apart by his punch. What surprised him was that the Mechanical Empress looked like a human girl. As if noticing the confusion in Joe's eyes, the girl bluntly stated that she was the Mechanical Empress he was looking for. Then the system confirmed that she was indeed the Mechanical Empress. Her panel was absurdly high. As an epic rank NPC, she had already reached level 48, and her HP bar had a terrifying 100,000 points. With stats like that, she could easily serve as a boss in an A rank dungeon. Yet now she had appeared inside an E rank dungeon. In the next moment, the Mechanical Empress used a skill to bind Joe's body. Then she slowly pulled him toward her. She softly told Joe that she would not hurt him, so there was no need to be too nervous. After that, she placed her right hand on Joe's forehead and began reading his memories. It turned out that although she was the Empress of the Machine Kingdom, she had never seen the outside world, and the Machine Kingdom dungeon would reset after a certain amount of time, restoring everything to its original state. From time to time, people would come here, find City Lord Huajun, and accept the hidden mission. But after so many resets, only Joe had broken the normal rules and truly reached her. Soon, Joe understood what she wanted. Joe told her she might as well just kill him. With him being only a level 11 weakling, there was no way he could fight against the dungeon's operating rules. The Mechanical Empress ignored his words. Instead, she opened her chest and took out her own mechanical heart. She said they could actually use the dungeon's operating rules in reverse. This was an S-rank item called the Mechanical Empress S Heart. As long as Joe wore the Empress's heart, it would eventually grow into another Mechanical Empress. That way, she could share the senses of her other body and experience the outside world. Her words shocked Joe. An NPC had actually developed self-awareness and was trying to escape the dungeon that created her. But for Joe, this was all benefit and no downside. After Joe agreed to her request, the system congratulated him for successfully clearing the Machine Kingdom dungeon with an A-rank clear rating. His rewards were a B-rank skill book, form lock, and a C-rank item, mechanical knuckles. After Joe teleported back, he immediately used the unsealing key to open the cube. To his surprise, stored inside was a divine weapon, the Green Dragon Crescent Blade. This should have been something his parents left for him. But how did they know that what Joe needed was a melee weapon? Just then, his homeroom teacher rushed in. He told Joe not to worry about that right now, because the grand exam was about to begin. At the same time, inside the Inner World Grand Exam Arena, First Academy and Joe's Fourth Academy had already gotten into an argument. Because Joe had not arrived, the exam had been delayed. So the students from First Academy thought the students from Fourth Academy should just crawl back to their own school. After all, every year in the Grand Exam, Fourth Academy's candidates were basically just background runners. First Academy, on the other hand, had produced the top scorer for 3 years in a row. Fortunately, Joe arrived at the exam arena at the last moment. The students from First Academy looked even more annoyed. They had not expected the person who kept them waiting this long to be someone who looked like a complete loser. Soon, Joe learned who they were. He also curled his lips into a mocking smile. Hopefully, they would still be this tough once they got into the arena. A moment later, the chief examiner in charge of the grand exam announced that the assessment had officially begun. This year's grand exam used a points-based elimination system. Winning a round gave 2 points, losing a round deducted 1 point, and a winning streak gave 1 extra point. Losing streaks would not cause any additional deductions. After 10 rounds, the 10 candidates with the highest scores would enter the arena stage and compete for the title of Grand Exam Champion. At the same time, candidates would be divided into different zones based on their classes. The rules were simple. The exam followed the rules of the duel ground, where HP could only drop to a minimum of 1 point, and no one would actually die. So a match would only end when one side's HP dropped to 1, or when one side admitted defeat. At this moment, last year's Grand Exam Champion, Long Shang, had also arrived in the public viewing area to watch the exam. He was very confident that this year's champion would still come from First Academy. As for Zhou Yu, his first-round opponent was Long Mietian from First Academy. He was the same guy who had been running his mouth earlier. Seeing this, Zhou's tone instantly turned sarcastic. "So you're Long Mietian. If I didn't know better, I'd think your name was Long Aotian." Then, the referee asked both sides to introduce their level and class. Long Mietian, of First Academy. Level 9, Apprentice Lightning Mage. Zhou Yu, of 4th Academy. Level 11, Beginner Tier, Necromancer. The moment those words fell, Long Mietian's pupils shrank. Zhou had already reached the Beginner Tier. That was already enough to compete for the Grand Exam Champion title. However, it just so happened that lightning magic naturally countered necromancy. Long Mietian immediately waved his staff and activated his skill, Thunder Surround. The commotion on this battlefield quickly drew the attention of the viewing stands. After all, the awakening rate of lightning mages was almost less than 1 in 10,000. They were so rare that they almost rivaled hidden classes. So at this moment, everyone was sweating for the lightning mage's opponent. Even last year's champion, Long Shang, showed interest. He wanted to know what would happen when 2 major mage branches clashed. But Zhou did not take out his staff or cast any necromancy spell. Instead, he simply walked forward. Then, he casually passed right through the thunder barrier Long Mietian had created. This scene scared Long Mietian so badly that cold sweat poured down his back. What kind of monster was this? Zhou had actually tanked his proudest thunder barrier head-on. Necromancers were supposed to be one of the squishiest classes. At this moment, everyone had the same thought as Long Mietian. This necromancer had completely shattered their understanding. Zhou had already arrived in front of Long Mietian, and his right hand was now equipped with the mechanical knuckles. A sound like flesh tearing suddenly rang out. Long Mietian's body flew backward like a cannonball. His HP bar was now down to the final 1 point. But in reality, Zhou's attack had dealt more than 1,000 damage. On any other map, Long Mietian would basically owe Zhou 5 extra lives. At this moment, everyone's expressions shifted from doubt to shock. A necromancer had tanked lightning magic, the very element that countered him, and still dealt more than 1,000 physical damage. Even the principal of First Academy felt like he had been tricked. Zhou's identity profile clearly listed him as a necromancer, but the scene in front of him felt like a slap straight across his face. Zhou's homeroom teacher simply said there was nothing wrong with it. The rules had never clearly stated that necromancers were not allowed to train physical strength. Just then, the referee appeared behind Zhou. Because Zhou's performance had been far too outstanding, and because someone had reported him for possible cheating, the referee team now had to test him. Seeing this, the other candidates all let out a deep sigh of relief. So Zhou was only this strong because he cheated. Otherwise, if they got matched against him, they would definitely get beaten badly. On the other side, Zhou followed the referee team's instructions and stepped into the testing array in front of him. To everyone's surprise, the array showed no abnormal data at all. In other words, that punch had been Zhou's real strength. This was exactly the scheme First Academy had set up. Their goal was to make Zhou miss the second round. If that happened, the referee would directly judge that Zhou voluntarily given up the exam. A moment later, Zhou appeared back in the exam arena. He said calmly, "Sorry. Looks like your hopes just fell apart again." This time, Zhou's opponent did not look very smart, because the guy directly chose to surrender. After all, he did not want to humiliate himself in front of everyone. With that, including the bonus points from his winning streak, Zhou's score had already reached 5 points. In theory, that was the highest score anyone could earn in 2 rounds. In the following rounds, every opponent matched against Zhou silently chose to surrender. Until the 9th round, under First Academy's secret manipulation, Zhou's opponent became Shi Xiaorong, an elite from Second Academy, and a level 11 beginner tier Ice Mage. In the next instant, Joe gripped the green dragon crescent blade tightly with both hands. His entire body shot towards Shi Xiaorong like a streak of lightning. Shi Xiaorong reacted extremely fast and instantly cast her defensive skill, Ice Wall Cage. Joe snorted coldly, put strength into his wrist, and swung the blade at high speed. The ice blocks in front of him were easily cleaved aside, one after another. But the moment Joe leaped into the air, Shi Xiaorong's face showed a confident smile. Using this opening, she immediately cast her control skill, Eternal Ice Wall. A cold blue light flashed through the air and struck Joe in the blink of an eye. The moment Joe was hit by that freezing power, his entire body was sealed in ice. Seeing this, everyone in the viewing stands felt sorry for Joe, so he only looked tough. As long as someone used a control skill, he could still be locked down. At this moment, the referee reminded Shi Xiaorong that the match was not over yet. Because Joe was only taking continuous damage, his HP had not dropped to 1 yet. Hearing this, Shi Xiaorong stood off to the side and waited for the result. After all, once enough time passed, Joe's HP bar would naturally hit the bottom. But, in reality, with that level of damage, it would take at least 2.5 hours to empty Joe's HP bar. A moment later, cracks began to appear in the ice wall Shi Xiaorong had created. Seeing this, Shi Xiaorong quickly poured in more mana to reinforce it. But this only confused her even more. Why had so much time passed, yet Joe's HP still had not dropped to 1? Instead, her ice wall cage was starting to crack. And because she had been maintaining the skill non-stop, her mana bar was nearly empty. In the next moment, Joe's figure slowly emerged from inside the ice wall. He said calmly, "Now the game should be over." Joe did not hold back and quickly ended the match. After the first phase of the exam ended, Joe successfully achieved a 10-win streak in the elimination rounds. Besides him, 9 other candidates also entered the second phase arena tournament. Whoever remained standing in the arena at the end would become this year's grand exam champion. Joe immediately stepped forward and chose to become the arena holder. During the break, Shi Xiaorong from Second Academy had told him something. In the 9th round, his original opponent had not been her. Someone had tampered with the matchups behind the scenes, trying to force Joe out of the elimination rounds early. A moment later, a figure slowly walked onto the arena. He spoke with an extremely arrogant tone, saying he would give Joe 5 million on the condition that Joe voluntarily gave up the exam. He had investigated Joe's background. Joe had been an orphan since he was very young, and his daily life had never been wealthy. So in his eyes, someone like Joe only wanted to use the grand exam to make a name for himself and then make money from it. Hearing this, Joe chuckled. It'd be nice if your strength was as impressive as your mouth. Seeing Joe's reaction, the other guy's face darkened, and he decided to teach Joe a lesson. He introduced himself as Gusu from First Academy, a beginner tier shadow mage. Hearing this, Joe thought to himself that based on what Gusu had just said, he was probably the one behind the earlier scheme. Just then, Gusu rapidly waved both hands while chanting under his breath. Then he swept his hand forward and summoned a shadow servant. Just like Joe's necromancer class, Shadow Mage was also a hidden summoning class. Everyone watched with bated breath, because this was destined to be an extremely shocking battle. At this moment, Joe Yu was a little surprised. He had not expected Gusu's summoned creatures to be no weaker than a necromancer's undead. But Joe's physical strength had already reached an extremely high level. He only casually swung the green dragon crescent blade a few times. In an instant, only 3 shadow servants were left on the field. This scene left Gusu completely stunned. Who said necromancers had fragile bodies? This guy was basically a humanoid beast. However, the moment Joe finished cutting down the shadow servants, Gusu chuckled and activated another skill, Sacrifice, Shadow Assimilation. The arm Joe had slashed just a second ago began healing at high speed. At the same time, Joe's right hand suddenly felt an unexplained burst of pain. Joe guessed that this had to be the effect of Gusu's skill. Any attack dealt to Gusu's real body would be reflected back onto Joe. But if Joe did not attack Gusu directly, he would not be able to win this arena match. Just then, Gusu pulled a dagger out of his pocket. Then, with a sharp stab, he drove it straight into his own chest. In an instant, Joe's HP bar began dropping rapidly as well. Gusu's behavior felt extremely strange to Joe. His heart had clearly been pierced, yet he was still standing there completely unharmed. And although the reflected damage was not that high, Joe could clearly feel every bit of the pain. What shocked Joe even more was that Gusu then made an absolutely insane move. Without hesitation, he raised the dagger and stabbed viciously toward his own lower body. Right before he could succeed, Joe used the green dragon crescent blade and knocked the dagger out of his hand in time. At the same time, Gusu seized this chance and activated Sacrifice, Shadow Assimilation, again. This time, the reflected damage directly took nearly 500 HP from Joe. Joe realized that even though Gusu was also a hidden summoning class, there was no way he should have such an overpowered skill. Maybe the black aura around him was the skill's restriction. Then, Joe warned him, "I've already figured out your skill. If I'm right, this next punch might actually kill you." Hearing this, Gusu did not look surprised at all. Instead, he told Joe with complete confidence that his skill had no weakness. At the same time, his right hand hidden behind his back quietly condensed a purple magic orb. In the next instant, the two figures on the field collided with overwhelming force. The moment Gusu activated his skill, Shadow Guard, Joe's fist slammed into it hard. Joe looked at Gusu's tense expression and said coldly, "If I really guessed wrong, then why are you going all out to block my attack right now?" Then Joe added a little more force into his fist. A moment later, Gusu's defensive barrier shattered into pieces. At this moment, Gusu could not believe what he was seeing. His shadow barrier was strong enough to block a full power attack from an ordinary boss. But in front of Joe, it was as fragile as paper. Joe slowly walked up to him. If you surrender now, there's still time. But in the next second, countless streams of black aura spread out from Gusu's body. Judging from his current state, he had completely fused with his summoned creature, the Shadow Servant. Gusu also admitted that this was indeed his fusion form. In this state, he could defeat any body cultivator of the same tier. His movements were now extremely fast. For a moment, Joe could not even lock onto his position. This scene made everyone in the viewing stands feel that the whole thing was ridiculous. If they remembered correctly, this was supposed to be the Mage arena. But now, it looked no different from a warrior match. Not far away, on the other side, two figures were standing there. Their faces were filled with anger. They were the two assassins who had intercepted Joe 2.5 days ago. They felt deeply deceived. So this man was the real target, Zhou Yu, not Ma Fei. But that was fine. They would be meeting again very soon. Meanwhile, in the arena, Gusu looked completely confused. He had already revealed his strongest form, yet he still had not gained the upper hand. On top of that, his transformation had a time limit. If he could not take Zhou down in one move, then once the time ran out, he would have no chance to turn things around. Thinking of this, Gusu activated an extremely dangerous skill, Sacrifice, Shadow Devour. This scene made the principal of First Academy panic. He had clearly forbidden Gusu from using this skill lightly. If anything went wrong, the entire area could be flattened. At this moment, the two of them began another storm-like exchange of attacks. Every collision produced a heavy, powerful impact. Even so, neither side could defeat the other in a short time. Suddenly, Joe saw something slide across above his head. When he regained consciousness again, he realized that he seemed to be inside a shipping container, and besides him, many other candidates were here as well. So, this was most likely a kidnapping operation aimed specifically at talented candidates. Just then, a figure in a black robe slowly walked over. She told Joe not to be too nervous. They had captured them because they valued each candidate's talent and abilities. As for her, she was Hua Tzi, the Sioux City regional leader of the Bai Zhe organization. Her words made Joe feel that Bai Zhe was truly a crazy organization. They had actually dared to kidnap candidates during the grand exam in front of everyone. Meanwhile, on the other side, the grand exam referee team and the leaders of the major academies were discussing an emergency rescue plan. They discovered that the kidnapped candidates were basically all contestants who had passed the elimination rounds. This meant Joe and the others should not be in immediate danger for now. Besides that, candidate kidnappings had also happened in 4 other cities across the country. As for Joe, he looked down at the handcuffs on his wrists with disdain. Then he used just a little force and easily shattered them. A moment later, Joe led all the candidates and opened the door of the shipping container. At the same time, Hua Tzu also saw them through the surveillance feed. Very quickly, she brought a group of people and chased after them. But she was extremely confused about how they had broken free from the cuffs. The Bai Zhe organization's handcuffs were designed to restrict body cultivators below level 20. Anyone below that level should have been completely unable to break them with brute force. Hearing this, Joe chuckled and told her it was actually very simple. First, you do this, and then you do that. Then, while Hua Tzi was briefly stunned, Joe and the others instantly activated an otherworld dungeon. This made Watsi, who was leading the group, extremely annoyed. If she waited here until they came out of the otherworld, reinforcements from Sioux City would probably have already arrived. So for now, her only option was to retreat. On the other side, Joe and the others had opened an E-rank dungeon. The mission was to head to Coffin Mountain and stop the resurrection of the Drought Demon. But Joe was the only one who appeared here. Had something gone wrong and sent everyone into different dungeons? And this dungeon was extremely strange. If Joe was not mistaken, he had become a dried corpse inside the dungeon. On top of that, the system forced him to follow the NPC corpse herder in front of him. A moment later, Joe followed the corpse herder to a manor. Then, 2.5 hours passed quickly. At that moment, two figures carrying a coffin slowly pushed open the manor gate. They were coffin carriers who lived nearby, and they had come here because they needed to find the corpse herder. Unfortunately, the corpse herder had gone out on business and had only left one apprentice here to watch over Joe. The coffin carrier immediately walked over with interest. In his eyes, although Joe was already dead, his handsome appearance meant he could definitely fetch a good price if sold to a wealthy family. Then, ignoring the young apprentice's attempt to stop them, they tried to forcibly carry Joe away. Seeing this, Joe slightly opened his mouth and let out an eerie sound. By the time they all snapped back to their senses, Joe had already torn the talisman off his forehead. This instantly terrified the young apprentice. His master really had not lied to him. If someone disrespected a corpse, there was a high chance the corpse would rise. On the other side, the corpse herder no longer had time to be shocked. He raised his hand and released a skill, trying to bind Joe's body. Unfortunately, Joe sent his body flying with a single slash. The feeling of touching Joe's body instantly made the coffin carrier realize something. This was not a risen corpse at all, because Joe did not have the death aura unique to corpses. The moment he finished speaking, the system issued a notification. Joe was currently in a corpse transformation state. In this state, he would gain an additional 100 defense. At the same time, corpse suppression methods used by corpse herders would work on him. Most importantly, while in this state, he could not recover HP or mana. No wonder Joe had been controlled by the corpse herder's soul-capturing bell earlier. This E-rank dungeon was actually pretty interesting. At this moment, the coffin carrier told his apprentice Ali to stall for time. As long as he completed the ritual, he would be able to suppress this thing that was neither human nor ghost. However, only 2.5 seconds passed. Ali's face already showed signs of strain. He had not expected Joe's strength to be this terrifying, so he could only urge his master to hurry up with the ritual. But the only response he got was a burst of panicked footsteps. The corpse herder had already turned and fled without looking back. Before Ali could even curse him out, he saw a burst of power rush straight toward the coffin carrier. Then the system popped up with a notification, congratulating Joe for successfully defeating the dungeon NPC, the corpse craftsman, and awarding him 75 experience points. At the same time, because Joe had defeated the NPC Thing Li through hand-to-hand combat, he was awarded 10 free attribute points. After that, Joe slowly walked over to the coffin brought by the coffin carrier. The system notified him that this coffin was called the Spirit-Suppressing Coffin. Rumor had it that anyone who lay inside had a chance to receive a special buff. But what Joe did not expect was that when he opened the coffin, the person lying inside was actually Zuo Yu. And in the next instant, she woke up. At this moment, Joe roughly understood what was going on. A total of 10 candidates had been captured by the ByZ organization, and after entering this dungeon, they had probably all become part of the dungeon mission. Thinking of this, Joe woke up the stunned corpse herder's apprentice. If you don't want to die, don't tell anyone about this. A moment later, the corpse herder returned to the manor. The apprentice immediately pointed at Zuoyo and told the corpse herder that he had just found a dried corpse outside the manor. Luckily, after giving it everything he had, he managed to subdue it. Hearing this, the corpse herder did not suspect anything. He simply turned around and told his apprentice to move faster, because something important had to be done at Coffin Mountain. Soon, under the corpse herder's lead, Joe and the others arrived at Little Apricot Village near Coffin Mountain. The corpse herder's senior disciple lived in this village. Now they planned to gather all disciples under their sect and head together to seal the corpse king that was about to emerge from Coffin Mountain. And just as Joe had guessed earlier, most of the other candidates were also in this manner. This scene completely stunned the young apprentice who had been left behind to watch them. This was the first time he had seen so many corpses come back to life at once. After that, Joe and the others followed the corpse herder toward the imperial tomb where the corpse king was located. Before coming here, Joe had learned something from the young apprentice. This was already the 5th time the corpse herders had performed the yin summoning ritual to summon the corpse king. And yin corpses like Joe and the others were the catalysts for this ritual. However, when Joe arrived at the imperial tomb, something unexpected happened. The corpse herder's senior disciple began chanting and cast a spell. The yin corpses have arrived. The heavenly emperor lowers his gaze. With yin corpses as the medium and human blood as the sacrifice, we welcome the heavenly emperor's descent upon the world. The other disciples instantly realized what was going on. Their senior brother was clearly planning to sacrifice them. The moment everyone understood this, they turned around and fled from the altar without looking back. But this place had already been rigged with traps by the senior disciple. Countless evil corpses walked out from every direction, blocking everyone's escape route. At this moment, Zhou Yu looked at the scene in front of him and fell into thought. The dungeon mission was to stop Hanba from waking up. If the senior disciple's plan succeeded, things would become extremely troublesome. In the next second, Zhou's figure shot forward and charged straight toward the evil corpses in front of him. At this moment, the senior disciple stood before the altar and continued the yin summoning ritual. But no matter how he chanted the spell, nothing happened. Then he glanced behind him and discovered that all 9 yin corpses had come back to life. Seeing this, he immediately pulled a horsetail whisk from his sleeve. Then he waved the whisk and began chanting again. In an instant, Zhou felt his movements become sluggish. He guessed that this might be one of the negative effects of his corpse transformation state. Meanwhile, the senior disciple kept speeding up his chanting. At the same time, everyone's body seemed to be tightly bound by an invisible but powerful force. Their already sluggish movements instantly came to a complete stop. The senior disciple walked over, covered in sweat. He promised that he would not hurt them, because once the corpse king revived, they would simply become its food. Still, they were indeed difficult to deal with. He had to spend quite a lot of energy just to freeze all of their bodies in place. Zhou stared at him and thought to himself that this was bad. He absolutely could not let him complete the yin summoning ritual. Then, Zhou revealed the truth to the corpse herder. "We came here to stop Hanba from reviving. Do you have any way to remove the restrictions on us?" While Zhou was speaking, the corpse herder looked completely shocked. Trembling, he asked Zhou whether the Hanba he mentioned was the imperial corpse inside the stone coffin. Zhou was confused. "You look terrified. Is Hanba really that strong?" The corpse herder then explained Hanba's origin. Hanba was not only an imperial corpse but also one of the 4 corpse ancestors. There was an old saying used to describe this corpse ancestor. When Hanba appears, 1,000 miles of land turn barren. If Hanba truly broke free from its seal and revived, not only would they die, but the entire world would be thrown into chaos. As he spoke, the corpse herder bit his finger open. Then he began casting a spell to break the restriction. He told Zhou that he had placed a spirit release talisman inside Zhou's body, along with his own pure yang blood essence. For a short time, all corpse control methods would become ineffective. In the next instant, Zhou shot forward like an arrow released from a bow. With a light swing of his right fist, he sent the senior disciple flying. However, the senior disciple's face was filled with arrogance. He thanked Zhou for helping him complete the final step of the yin summoning ritual. After the stone coffin was stained with blood, it began to tremble slowly. Then, with a heavy thud, a large hand burst out from inside the coffin. Bone-chilling winds howled through the area, forming clouds of purple-black miasma. As the ground shook more and more violently, a thick stench of rot surged out of the coffin. At the same time, the system popped up with a mission update. E-rank mission. Stop Hanba's revival has been changed to D-rank mission. Defeat the corpse ancestor Hanba. As the purple miasma gradually dispersed, the corpse ancestor's true form slowly appeared. It was Hanba, a level 20 epic boss. The corpse ancestor attacked first. Its body moved like a streak of black lightning, rushing toward Zhou at terrifying speed. Zhou clenched his fist and slammed it toward Hanba's chest with full force. The powerful impact sent Hanba flying backward again and again before it crashed heavily into the ground. Then Hanba curled its lips into a sinister smile. In the next moment, a cloud of ghostly green miasma burst out of its mouth. Seeing this, Zhou quickly shifted sideways to dodge. But this corpse poison was a damage over time skill. Fortunately, Zhao Ziyu and the others arrived in time. At this moment, Hanba strode toward the group. At the same time, it activated a support skill, Corpse Ancestor Pressure. The system notified them that because of the skill effect, everyone's attributes would be reduced by half. This made Zhou grit his teeth in anger. The mage's HP was already pitifully low, and now it had been cut in half on top of that. This Hanba was much harder to deal with than Shindong. At this moment, Even the swordsman candidate with the highest damage output looked troubled. After his attributes were cut in half, he could barely damage Hanba at all. He believed that if they wanted to defeat Hanba, they would have to rely on teamwork. But in the very next second, a deafening sound interrupted everyone's thoughts. Joe had already rushed in front of Hanba, and his fist smashed straight into its chest without any resistance. With a critical hit, the damage reached nearly 400 points. Seeing this, Gusu refused to fall behind and immediately summoned his shadow servants. At the same time, Yang Xiangdi and the others had also finished charging their spells. In an instant, the two strongest magic skills blasted toward Hanba at the same time, while Hanba was distracted dealing with the attacks from the front. Joe raised his fist and appeared behind it. Caught between attacks from both sides, Hanba's body suffered serious damage. After the dust cleared, its body trembled slightly as it dropped to its knees in exhaustion. Seeing this, Joe leaped into the air, ready to deliver the final blow. When the corpse herder saw Joe's move, he hurriedly shouted a warning, but it was already too late. With a thunderous boom, Hanba's body was smashed deep into the ground. Then, the system notified Joe that he had defeated the corpse ancestor Hanba through hand-to-hand combat and successfully cleared the Coffin Mountain dungeon. At the same time, the corpse herder hurried over. He told Joe that he should not have acted so recklessly, because the person who killed Hanba would suffer an extremely severe curse. By then, Hanba's corpse had already begun slowly dissolving into dark red gas. In the next second, the system issued a warning. Joe had been afflicted with the corpse ancestor Hanba's curse, and he would die in 30 days. Hearing this, Joe quickly asked the corpse herder whether there was any way to break the curse. But the corpse herder could only tell him helplessly that according to historical records, no one who had ever been cursed by Hanba had survived past 30 days. But Joe remained calm. Although the curse sounded terrifying, Coffin Mountain was still only a D-rank dungeon. Once he reached Capital University, there should be a way to deal with it. Just then, Yang Xiangdi reminded Joe from a distance to take the soul core dropped by Hanba. At this moment, Gusu had already touched the boss soul core. He chuckled and gave Joe a provocative smile. He thanked Joe for killing the corpse ancestor Hanba, but now the soul core belonged to him. The item dropped from the soul core was an A-rank piece of equipment, the corpse ancestor ring, which could steal 50% of an enemy target's agility. After taking the ring, Gusu teleported away from the Coffin Mountain dungeon with a flash. However, the instant his figure was about to disappear completely, Yang Xiangdi used his control skill, Yellow Springs Mud Swamp, and trapped his body. In an instant, Joe rushed forward. Seeing this, Gusu calmly threw out the ring, trying to steal Joe's agility. As long as he could successfully take Joe's stats, he was confident he could escape. But what he did not expect was that after the theft, his agility only increased by a few points. Joe raised his fist and smashed it hard into Gusu's jaw. I think I forgot to tell you, every time I level up, I put all my attribute points into strength. And now that corpse ancestor pressure is gone, dealing with you is way too easy. Then, the moment Gusu crashed to the ground, an ice skill struck from behind and froze both of his legs. At this moment, Shi Xiaorong slowly walked over. She had not forgotten how Gusu had secretly manipulated things for his own selfish reasons. Otherwise, she might have had a chance to compete in the grand exam elimination rounds. Seeing that he had completely lost, Gusu immediately removed the ring from his hand. Then, filled with unwillingness, he left the Coffin Mountain dungeon. Joe looked at the corpse ancestor ring in his hand. Although this ring was not very useful against someone like him, it could serve as a countermeasure against opponents with high agility. A moment later, everyone left the Coffin Mountain dungeon. They returned to the real world. At this time, the mentors had already located the Baizhe organization's Sioux City branch, based on the intelligence they had gathered. Besides that, they also brought another piece of news. For safety reasons, this year's battle for Grand Exam Champion would be suspended for now. Next, the candidates would be escorted to their respective universities. Meanwhile, inside an old castle in the suburbs, Hua Qi knelt on the ground with great respect. She reported that the reason the Sioux City operation had failed was still because a candidate named Zhou Yu had taken the lead in ruining their plan. Her words made the commander sitting above her reveal an interested smile. As expected, the new generation had surpassed the old. In the blink of an eye, 2.5 days passed. After completing his enrollment, Zhou went to see Ji Pingyang, the principal of Capital University. Zhou said, "Principal, I'd like to ask you about something." As he spoke, he pulled up his sleeve and revealed a string of ancient characters on his arm. A few days ago, he had killed the boss of the Coffin Mountain dungeon, the corpse ancestor Hanba. But before it died, the boss had placed a curse on him. Ji Pingyang understood Zhou's intention. This curse counted as a mark that was extremely difficult to erase. Right now, the most reliable solution was to find an item called Sage's Protection. But as an S-rank item, it was rarely sold on the market. Hearing this, Zhou could not help feeling a little regretful. He had not expected Sage's Protection to be so precious. If he had known earlier, he would have used a different method to clear the dungeon when dealing with Simdong. However, aside from that, there was one other way to remove Hanba's curse. It was just that with Zhou's current strength, it was almost impossible. He would need to clear a real D-ranked dungeon. Hearing this, Zhou told Ji Pingyang not to worry too much. He had already completed a D-rank mission before. But Ji Pingyang looked serious. A D-rank mission inside an E-rank dungeon and a true D-rank dungeon are two completely different things. There is no comparison between the two. Most players who can enter D-rank dungeons are mid-tier players. If a low-tier player like you goes in, you could be farmed like an NPC at any moment. Zhou told the old principal that there was no need to worry about that. If he had doubts, he could test Zhou's current strength at any time. The instant Zhou finished speaking, an unbearable pressure erupted around Ji Pingyang. At this moment, Zhou felt an abnormal pain in his eyes, as if a sword were stirring inside them. However, Zhou's reaction shocked Ji Pingyang. He had not expected Zhou, who was only low-tier, to withstand an aura that normally only mid-tier players or above could endure. Perhaps Zhou really did have the ability to clear that D-rank dungeon. After that, Ji Pingyang explained the origin of a dungeon to Zhou. Its name was Soul Cleansing Lake. Any player who entered Soul Cleansing Lake could wash away all negative statuses. To help Zhou adapt to the environment of the Soul Cleansing Lake dungeon, Ji Pingyang gave him an A-rank piece of equipment, the Qiang Qi Pendant. It could resist mental control. A moment later, Zhou stepped into the dungeon portal for Soul Cleansing Lake. The rules were extremely strange, with 4 points in total. First, if someone calls your name from behind, never turn around. Second, if a teammate leaves everyone's line of sight for more than 1 minute, pay close attention to that player's behavior afterward. Third, memorize every teammate's behavior and speaking habits as quickly as possible. Lastly, if strange singing or whispering suddenly appears beside your ear, immediately curse it with the most vicious words you can think of until the sound disappears. Friendly reminder, if a stranger appears in the rainforest and asks you a question, do not answer. After everyone finished reading the dungeon rules, the teammates began appearing one after another. Their strength was basically all above mid-tier. So when they learned that Zhou was only a level 13, low-tier player, one man with glasses could not help muttering that this matchmaking system was disgusting. Although he was fully confident that he could clear this dungeon, a low-tier player like Zhou would definitely slow him down. However, a girl named Mi Yuan disagreed. If Zhou could summon enough undead, he could still display the strength of a mid-tier player. This dungeon's mission was to reach Soul Cleansing Lake, and Soul Cleansing Lake was located at the very center of the Soul Cleansing Rainforest. However, just as Zhou stepped into the rainforest, a figure identical to him suddenly appeared beside him. No matter what Zhou did, the other figure would make the exact same move at the same time. The teammates also noticed that something was wrong, but they had only known Zhou for about 2.5 minutes, so they could not tell which one was the real Zhou. The man with glasses proposed a solution. They might as well kill both of them. After all, keeping Zhou in the team would only drag them down. Mi Yuan interrupted him. Since his class is Necromancer, then the one who can use Necromancy must be real. Seeing this, one of the two Zhous immediately used Necromancy without hesitation. This made Zhou's heart tighten. He had not expected the fake to have another trick up its sleeve. And as a Necromancer who only knew how to fight in close combat, he doubted these people would believe him. Then, before his teammates could react, Zhou raised the green dragon crescent blade and charged forward. With a sharp slash, he cut the fake in front of him in half. In the next moment, its true body slowly appeared. It looked like some kind of vine-type plant. The system notified Zhou that this was a dungeon monster, the evil spirit puppet. And when Zhou cut it down, he felt as if something had entered the green dragon crescent blade. At this moment, the teammates walked toward Zhou. They were curious why a necromancer would rely on physical combat, and why he could deal with a level 20 evil spirit puppet so effortlessly. Just then, a ghostly green flame appeared where the evil spirit puppet had died. In an instant, it entered Mi Yuan's eye. The next moment, a deep bloody wound appeared across Zhou's chest. Fortunately, his HP pool was large enough now. Otherwise, he might have died right there. However, after being possessed by the evil spirit, Mi Yuan became even stronger. Even with all the teammates attacking together, they could not hurt her at all. Zhou seized the right moment and appeared behind her. Then, he temporarily knocked her unconscious. This scene terrified the man with glasses. Just who was this necromancer? He had knocked out a mid-tier sword cultivator above his level with a single punch. After Mi Yuan had been unconscious for 2.5 minutes, something strange crawled out of her body. Seeing this, Zhou Yu raised the green dragon crescent blade and mercilessly pinned it to the ground. It looked like he really had to be careful with this thing. If it possessed Zhou by accident, these teammates would probably all die here. After Mi Yuan woke up, the group continued deeper into the rainforest. A moment later, the man with glasses and another teammate fell behind the group and accidentally got separated. Just as they tried to speed up and catch up, a strange figure faintly appeared behind them. The system notified them that this was a rare dungeon monster, the yellow weasel. The moment it appeared, it asked a question. "Friend, do I look more like a human or a god?" Hearing this, the man with glasses raised his middle finger without even thinking. He thought this yellow weasel was a complete idiot. With a face that ugly, how could it possibly look human? The instant he finished speaking, the yellow weasel rushed forward and slashed down with one vicious claw. The other teammate was speechless. Before they entered, the dungeon rules had clearly warned them not to answer a stranger's questions. Now, in his eyes, the man with glasses was the one who looked more like dead weight. Meanwhile, Joe faintly heard sounds of fighting from behind. By the time the group arrived, the man with glasses and the other teammate were already lying on the ground, unconscious. At this moment, the yellow weasel ahead turned around and asked the same question again. "Do I look more like a human or a god?" Joe did not answer its question. Instead, he asked back, "Then do you think I'm your dad or your grandpa?" The moment he said that, the yellow weasel lunged straight at Joe. In the blink of an eye, a barely visible cut appeared on Joe's face. At this moment, the yellow weasel's vicious aura actually faded a little. That attack had only dealt a little over 300 damage to Joe. Even top mid-tier players could not guarantee they could take that move head-on. Then Joe quickly swung his right hand with the brass knuckles and struck the yellow weasel precisely in the abdomen. With a loud bang, Joe instantly killed it. The teammates beside him stared in shock. Besides, they had never seen a necromancer who fought with his fists. After waking up, the man with glasses immediately raised a question. "You're a necromancer, but you look way too strange. Maybe the fake who died earlier was the real Zhou Yu. After all, he actually knew how to use necromancy. Unless you can prove your identity." Joe told them coldly. "Have you ever seen a fake carrying these items?" At that moment, the man with glasses seemed to notice something. He immediately changed his tone and said it had all been a misunderstanding. He had simply overreacted, then apologized to Joe. After that, the group continued deeper into the rainforest. When they arrived at Soul Cleansing Lake, a terrifying scene appeared before everyone. Mi Yuan guessed that the wandering souls ahead might be players who had once tried to clear the Soul Cleansing Lake dungeon, but failed in the end. From the look of it, the death rate of this D-rank dungeon was truly terrifying. A moment later, the group also discovered an altar nearby. Ancient characters were carved into the stone tablet. The general meaning was that this place was an ancient sacrificial site, and only by sacrificing living beings could they complete the dungeon mission. The figures wandering by the lake were called lake slaves. Any sacrificed living being would become a lake slave and guard Soul Cleansing Lake forever. In a place no one noticed, the man with glasses and his companion Wu Chengfu quietly revealed dark smiles. Then, both of them attacked at the same time, slamming their skills into Joe's back. They pushed Joe's body precisely onto the altar. Joe's gaze darkened. "I'm really starting to regret saving you two ungrateful bastards." However, they did not know how to activate the altar. Just as they were thinking about their next move, Joe slowly walked out from inside the altar. In the next second, both of them attacked Joe at the same time. Joe hurriedly raised his blade to block. With a loud clang, the sound of metal crashing echoed in every direction. At this moment, Wu Chengfu stopped hiding his true purpose and attacked Joe directly. He said that if Joe handed over all his items, maybe they would let him die quickly. Joe did not care at all. No wonder their attitude had changed so quickly earlier. So they had been after his equipment. At this moment, the man with glasses seized the chance and attacked from behind. But his attack was quickly blocked by Mi Yuan. The man with glasses was annoyed. He told Mi Yuan to get lost and stop ruining his plan. He also claimed that he was helping the team complete the dungeon mission. As long as they sacrificed Joe, they could clear Soul Cleansing Lake. Mi Yuan was not fooled by his words. First of all, Joe had saved her when they first entered the dungeon. And besides, the stone tablet said to sacrifice a living being. It never said they had to sacrifice a teammate. In an instant, the whole battlefield turned into a storm of flashing blades and clashing weapons. But at that moment, a figure activated the altar mechanism. In the next second, everyone's body began shaking violently. The mental attack that followed was even harder to endure. Fortunately, the Kyongchi pendant that the old principal had given Joe before he left could help him resist mental attacks. That figure was Tang Lan, the wood mage who had stayed quiet almost the entire time. At this moment, she revealed an innocent smile. She thought this was just human nature. Since they wanted to fight so badly, they might as well stay here and fight forever. Joe still felt that something was off. How did Tang Lan know how to activate the altar? Thinking carefully, this person really was strange. Not only had she avoided danger the entire way, but she was also the one who had led them to the altar. A thought suddenly appeared in Joe's mind. Maybe this was not her first time entering the soul-cleansing lake dungeon. Thinking of this, Joe raised the green dragon crescent blade and slashed several times, cutting through the surrounding vines. Seeing this, Tang Lan chuckled and used another skill, vine enhancement. In the next second, the vines in front of him visibly grew thicker. Even after Joe cut them apart, the broken ends quickly healed. Then, while Joe was briefly distracted, something quietly burrowed into his neck. At this moment, watching Tang Lan slowly walk toward him, Joe quickly took out the corpse ancestor ring. He directly stole 50% of her agility. Then he equipped the Kyonshi pendant and gained a buff that increased skill power by 30%. Tang Lan remained calm. She was different from that useless man with glasses. Her strength was already close to that of a top mid-tier player. However, Joe's body passed straight through the vine shield she had used for defense, without any resistance. Then, as his fist came crashing down, he directly knocked 1,314 points off her HP bar. At this point, Tang Lan had completely lost the ability to fight. She left behind a threat, then teleported out of the dungeon. This scene felt oddly familiar. Joe remembered that Gu Su had done the same thing back then. If not for the Kyongchi pendant from the principal, he might really have been finished this time. After that, Joe raised the green dragon crescent blade and slowly walked toward the altar. By this time, the man with glasses and the others had almost been sacrificed. But this altar had no reason to exist. With that, Joe raised the green dragon crescent blade and slammed it into the center of the altar. With a ding, the system notified Joe that he had successfully absorbed the life energy of the soul-cleansing altar and obtained 20 free attribute points. At this moment, Mi Yuan and the others finally recovered. They thanked Joe. If not for him, they would probably have been sacrificed too. As repayment, they decided to give up on this dungeon mission. Then, Joe walked to Soul Cleansing Lake and jumped in with a splash. As long as he stayed inside for 2.5 minutes, the curse on his body would be cleansed. At this moment, Joe recalled that during the battle, Tang Lan had secretly planted a wood seed inside him, but Soul Cleansing Lake could not remove it, so the wood seed probably was not harmful to his body. After parting ways with Mi Yuan and the others, Joe appeared in the principal's office again. Ji Pingyang looked completely shocked. He had not expected Joe to actually clear the Soul Cleansing Lake dungeon. Joe told him that he had not truly cleared the dungeon, because Soul Cleansing Lake was still too difficult. He had only reached the lake and then teleported out. But thanks to the principal's pendant, he had managed to return alive. That night, Joe lay in bed, thinking about how to deal with the wood seed. He had come back in such a hurry that he forgot to ask the old principal whether he knew the origin of the wood seed. But Joe had no idea that at this very moment, something big was waiting for him. Early the next morning, Joe Yu's counselor came to find him with a furious look on his face. Because Joe had actually given up the Mage program and switched to the Body Cultivator program instead, Joe did not dare tell the truth. If the Necromancer instructors found out that he could not even summon a skeleton, they would probably beat him flat on the spot. After scolding Joe, the counselor handed each student a student card. Capital University used a special credit system. Each card came with 10 basic credits. Credits could only be earned by accepting school-issued missions or completing instructor assessments. So at Capital University, money did not matter. Credits were the real hard currency. A moment later, Joe arrived at the Body Cultivator class to report in. The instructor's name was Wan Li Hao. He was a level 35 high-tier Body Cultivator. He said that next, he would release his pressure. Only those who could withstand that pressure and still remain standing after 5 minutes would be qualified to stay in this class. After saying that, he waved his hand and released a terrifying wave of pressure. In just an instant, the students around him felt an invisible force crashing down like a mountain and an ocean at once. Even breathing became difficult. After that, Wan Li Hao gave everyone a little time to prepare. At this moment, a player named Lin Lang stepped out from the crowd. He said that facing Wan Li Hao head-on would definitely be too much, so they had to work together to pass the test. His plan was to split into pairs and take turns dealing with Wan Li Hao. His suggestion was to pair one strong student with one weaker student. That way, the teams would stay balanced, and everyone would have a better chance of passing. When Lin Lang saw Zhou standing alone, he invited Zhou to team up with him, but he was also curious. Zhou looked so thin, so what kind of body cultivator class could he possibly be? Hearing this, Zhou told him that he was not a body cultivator, he was a necromancer. The moment everyone heard that, the surrounding students could not help laughing. They had not expected a necromancer to sneak into the body cultivator class. Zhou told Lin Lang not to worry. He probably would not hold him back. Not long after, Wan Li Hao released his pressure again, but his first target was actually Zhou. Seeing this, Lin Lang quickly rushed forward and stood in front of Zhou. However, even he could not withstand it head-on. Several students were instantly stunned. They had come from the same batch of examinees as Lin Lang, yet someone as strong as Lin Lang had been casually sent flying. Right after that, Wan Li Hao threw out a second punch. Zhou raised his own fist and charged forward, without fear. Although he barely managed to take it, the scattered shockwave still knocked more than 100 points off his HP. At this moment, Wan Li Hao looked shocked. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. A necromancer had actually taken the shockwave of his punch. Thinking of this, he shook his body and strengthened the pressure even further. This time, Zhou still took it, but the damage was now close to 1000 HP. This scene made everyone lose their composure. Who exactly was this kid? Wasn't he supposed to be a necromancer? How was he doing this? Zhou felt speechless. He had not expected Wan Li Hao to hit this hard. Was this guy using him to establish authority? The next second, Zhou grinned. Mr. Wan, did you skip breakfast or something? Instead of getting angry, Wan Li Hao laughed. Even in this situation, Zhou could still stand up and joke with him. If Zhou could take the next punch. Wan Li Hao promised that no matter what Zhou did at Capital University in the future, he would cover for him. As Wan Li Hao stepped closer, a massive wave of pressure swept forward like rolling thunder. In an instant, the two of them collided with a thunderous boom. The terrifying impact compressed the surrounding air, forming a visible rain of shockwaves, while the ground beneath their feet began to crack. Zhou's right arm visibly swelled up from the force of his punch. But because the gap in strength was too great, Zhou still failed to hold his ground, and his body kept flying backward. Seeing this, Wan Li Hao immediately told several students to send Zhou to the infirmary. He started to regret it. He should not have pushed Zhou that hard. But in the next second, Zhou's body shakily stood back up. I still have 240 HP left. So, Mr. Wan, I took that punch. When Zhou regained consciousness again, he had no idea how much time had passed. The first person he saw was Wan Li Hao. Wan Li Hao told Zhou that he would keep his earlier promise. From now on, at Capital University, he would cover for him. Just then, a voice interrupted him. The person who arrived was Professor Shen from the Necromancer program. He had come to ask Zhou why he had given up on the Necromancer program. As he spoke, he showed Zhou the true power of a necromancer. Suddenly, the air around them filled with the aura of decay and death. Black cracks spread rapidly, like spiderwebs. Then, a group of sinister skeleton warriors slowly crawled out from the cracks. Their bones shimmered with an eerie glow under the ghostly green light. Professor Shen said that if Zhou changed his mind and joined the Necromancer program, he would teach him every necromancy spell without holding anything back. His offer was truly tempting. But Zhou's mental power was zero. Right now, he could not even summon the most basic skeleton soldier. So, Zhou politely turned Professor Shen down. I'm sorry, Professor Shen. I still choose to stay in the body cultivator class. Since Zhou had already made his decision, Professor Shen did not say anything more. He took out a card and handed it to Zhou, saying that if Zhou ever changed his mind, he could contact him anytime. After saying that, he stepped onto a teleportation array and left the ward. Wan Li Hao told Zhou to focus on recovering, because an interesting training camp was waiting for him next. In the blink of an eye, the next day arrived, and Wan Li Hao brought everyone into a C-rank dungeon. Today's mission was to sit cross-legged in the dark forest until sunset. It sounded very simple, but in reality, the place was filled with wind blades. Without enough strength, there was no way anyone could sit in that cursed place for an entire day. Wan Li Hao told everyone that this was a path every qualified body cultivator had to go through, And besides that, there was also a hidden surprise inside. Lin Lang was still the first to step forward. The moment he entered the wind blade zone, countless razor-sharp blades of wind began attacking his body. At this point, everyone had no choice but to grit their teeth and walk in. From behind them, Wan Lihao reminded them that as long as their defense was above 100, dealing with these wind blades should not be a problem. Zhou looked at the system window showing his 6 points of defense and felt completely speechless. This old guy really knew how to hold a grudge. Still, Zhou's HP was already close to 5,000. If converted into defense, that would be worth several hundred points. However, when Zhou stepped into the wind blade zone, surprise appeared on his face. So, this was the surprise Wan Lihao had mentioned. Training here could actually increase his defense. Time quickly passed, and 2.5 hours went by. Although Zhou had a massive HP pool, the rate at which he was losing health was still too fast. If this continued, he might not be able to last the entire day. Suddenly, at that moment, the wood seed lying dormant inside his body began to activate. Then Zhou felt his HP rapidly rising. It was actually absorbing energy from the forest. It must have sensed that Zhou's body was starting to weaken and reacted out of survival instinct. With this, it could completely offset the HP being drained by the wind blades. As time passed, fewer and fewer students remained inside the wind blade zone. But to everyone's surprise, Zhou the necromancer was still holding on. Another 2.5 hours passed. At this point, even Lin Lang could no longer endure it and left the wind blade zone. Now, Zhou was the only one left inside. It was not until night fell that Zhou finally walked out of the wind blade zone. By then, his defense had increased to 23 points. In just one day, he had gained a full 17 points of defense. Soon, it was the rest day. But Zhou planned to return to the wind blade zone and train again, because over the past few days, his defense had increased by a huge amount. Suddenly, at that moment, Yang Shangdi and the others called out from behind him. They had come to ask whether Zhou planned to create a guild. Once they had a guild, they could do many things, such as exclusive guild dungeons and guild wars. As for the name, they had already thought of one. It would be called the Godslayer Guild. Hearing this, Zhou had no objection. You guys submit the application first. I'll meet up with you after I finish training. However, after training for a while, his defense did not increase much. Zhou guessed that his current defense might have already reached the limit for a low-tier player. After all, a low-tier player with 500 defense was already terrifying. Just then, a mysterious light suddenly appeared in front of Zhou. Then, the mechanical empress slowly manifested before him. Zhou was surprised. How did you suddenly appear here? The mechanical empress explained that the wood seed inside Zhou had been continuously absorbing energy these past few days, and by sheer coincidence, it had helped her build a new body. After saying that, she turned into a flash of light again. Then, with a whoosh, she merged into Zhou's heart. Because Zhou had once promised her something, he had promised to help her experience the outside world. Still, the feeling of suddenly having another person inside his body was definitely strange. After that, Zhou planned to head to the place where guilds were created and meet up with Yang Shangdi and the others. Meanwhile, on the other side, Yang Shangdi and the others were being surrounded and attacked by a group from the Blazing Fire Guild. Because the other guild needed honor points to level up, they had launched a guild crusade. Their other excuse was that Yang Shangdi's group had chosen a guild name that was far too arrogant. What kind of trash name was Godslayer Guild? They had never even heard of it. By the time Zhou arrived, Ma Fei had already been beaten flat on the ground. Zhou's gaze turned cold as he equipped his brass knuckles. You touched my people. Did you ask me first? The moment Zhou said this, the opposing vice guild leader immediately revealed an amused smile. In the next second, he raised his fist and charged straight at Zhou. As his fist slammed down, a powerful aura spread through the area. However, Zhou's body did not move in the slightest. Zhou felt a little speechless. I thought your Blazing Fire Guild was supposed to be impressive. Turns out you're just a bunch of small fry. The vice guild leader did not even hear what Zhou said, because his mind had already gone blank. He had clearly used 80% of his strength, yet he had not even broken Zhou's defense. Was this kid a cultivator who dumped all his points into defense? Thinking of this, he threw out another skill, 7 Kill Fist. Seeing this, the members of the Blazing Fire Guild finally relaxed. They had all witnessed how powerful 7 Kill Fist was. Until now, no body cultivator of the same level had ever taken it head-on. But, on this side, the Vice Guild leader's lips began to tremble. His 7 Kill Fist had done absolutely nothing. Zhou Yu let out a cold laugh. Is your little performance over? Good. Now it's my turn. Just then, someone behind the vice leader shouted, his defense is that high, so there's no way his attack power is strong too. If you both go all out head to head, the advantage is still yours. Hearing that, the vice leader regained his confidence and took his stance again. That did make sense. There was no way Joe's attack power could be just as terrifying as his defense. But the moment those words fell, Joe's figure flashed forward. In the next instant, his right fist collided head-on with the vice leader's fist. In just a split second, the vice leader completely lost control of his body and slammed hard into the ground. At the same time, his right fist was badly deformed. Then, another figure slowly stepped out from the crowd. The moment he appeared, Joe felt the air around him change. This man was at least a mid-tier player. His tone was still fairly polite as he introduced himself as Luto, the leader of the Blazing Fire Guild. Luto said that a full guild war would cause losses for both sides, so they might as well settle it between him and Joe. The losing side would surrender as a group and hand over the required honor points. That instantly made Zuo furious. The rules sounded fair, but Luto was already a mid-tier player, yet Joe barely hesitated before agreeing. The next second, Luto shot forward. His fist slammed heavily into Joe's raised left arm. That force proved he was definitely a mid-tier player. And with that kind of raw power, was he also a body cultivator? But in the very next moment, a dagger suddenly appeared in Luto's other hand. Joe's HP instantly dropped by several hundred points. Only then did Joe realize he had been careless. Luto's class was actually assassin. Worse, the dagger was coated with a blinding poison, and Joe's vision quickly began to blur. Luto immediately followed up with Gale Fist, smashing toward Joe again. Because of the poison, Joe's movements slowed down, forcing him to take the punch head-on. Luto then drew his dagger again, ready to deliver the finishing blow. But just as the blade was about to stab into him, a red glow suddenly erupted around Joe's body. An attack came out of nowhere and blasted Luto straight back. In an instant, Luto's HP dropped to half. The mechanical empress warned Joe to be more careful. After all, his body was technically her body now too. Luto was clearly shaken by that power. He threw out a threat and tried to turn away. Joe's eyes turned cold as he activated the corpse ancestor ring. You were the ones who came looking for trouble. You don't get to decide when this ends. The next second, Joe shot forward like an arrow released from the string. His fist ripped through the air and slammed toward Luto's jaw. With a dull bang, Luto was forced back several steps. Luto's heart sank. At this point, he had no choice but to go all in. Besides, that strange attack from earlier had not appeared again, so he guessed that Joe must have to spend most of his stamina just to use it once. With that thought, Luto quickly spat several poison needles from his mouth. Joe immediately crossed his arms to block them, but the poison needles had terrifying piercing power. Even after blocking them, his body still went numb. Luto pressed the attack even harder. In an instant, countless poison needles scattered through the air like a storm. Then, Luto pressed his palms together and activated his skill, Wisdom Bind. The next moment, Joe's body froze in place as if sealed by a paralysis spell. Only then did Luto finally let down his guard. This was a killing move designed specifically to counter body cultivators. Any warrior-type player hit by Wisdom Bind would lose the ability to move. He grinned wide, laughing like a maniac, as he slapped Joe's face again and again. Come on, kid. Act tough now. The members of the Blazing Fire Guild burst into laughter too. This idiot really thought a low-tier player could beat a mid-tier player? A moment later, Joe slowly forced one word out of his mouth. Luto instantly felt a chill run down his spine. Someone hit by Wisdom Bind should not even be able to speak. He desperately hoped he had misheard. But in the next second, a powerful pressure erupted from Joe's body, and his cold voice stabbed into Luto's ears like ice. Did it ever occur to you that my class is Necromancer? As soon as he said that, Joe poured all his strength into his arm and launched a clean uppercut straight into Luto's chest. Luto was not only in agony, he was completely horrified. What kind of insane joke was this? How could a Necromancer have this much physical strength? Joe did not waste another word and punched Luto flying. Luto crashed hard into the ground and passed out on the spot. Then the system chimed, announcing that the Godslayer Guild had won the guild war, and all of the Blazing Fire Guild's honor points now belonged to them. Overall, the group had not suffered much damage from the fight. The only serious loss was Zuyo's shield, which had been shattered in battle. For a defensive player, that was almost devastating, so Joe asked the mechanical empress inside him if there was any inner world dungeon that had a good chance of dropping shield-type equipment. After thinking for a moment, the empress told him, "There is one, but with your current strength, even the dogs in that place could beat you." After learning about the dungeon, Joe comforted Zuo Yu and told her not to worry. He would handle the shield problem. A short while later, following the empress's directions, Joe arrived before the portal to the D-rank dungeon, False Underworld. This dungeon required at least 2 people to enter.
The moment Zhou Yu and Zuo Yu touched the teleportation orb, they entered the False Underworld dungeon. The opening prompt explained that the Underworld was a world created by Hades, while the False Underworld was a one-to-one replica modeled after the real Underworld. In other words, this was another artificial false world. This time, Joe did not enter in some special form like he had in the Coffin Mountain dungeon. Instead, he entered the False Underworld as a living person. But very soon, Joe noticed something strange. At this moment, a cross had appeared around Zuo Yu's neck. Joe remembered clearly that Zuo Yu never had the habit of wearing accessories. A moment later, the same kind of cross appeared around Joe's neck as well. He guessed it had to be some kind of mission item. With a ding, the system opened the mission window. To clear the False Underworld dungeon, they had to complete stage missions. Stage 1, pass through the legendary gates of hell. Stage 2, cross the Acheron River afterward. During this time, they had to protect the crosses from being lost. Only after completing all stage missions could they receive the dungeon clear rewards. Friendly reminder, please trust the teammate traveling with you completely. At that moment, a shadowy figure appeared ahead. It was probably the guide inside the dungeon, so they just had to follow him. Soon, the two arrived at the gates of hell. Many figures were gathered outside the gate. According to legend, only after the dead passed through the gates of hell could they reach the true underworld. But right now, a ferocious monster had appeared inside the gates of hell. It was constantly devouring the souls entering the gate. The system notified Joe that this was an epic wild monster, the 3-headed hellhound, Cerberus. Friendly reminder, anyone who tries to force their way through the gates of hell will be swallowed by Cerberus. Joe forced out a stiff smile. If he had known there was really a dog in this dungeon, he would never have come. Hearing this, the mechanical empress looked completely unimpressed. Cerberus was a dog native to hell, so what she said earlier had not been wrong. But the system mission only required them to pass through the gates of hell. As long as they did not force their way through, there should not be any major problem, right? However, the moment Joe finished speaking, Cerberus let out a howl and bit down on his body. Then, with a few loud gulps, it swallowed Joe straight into its stomach. At the same time, another one of its heads sprayed poison towards Zuo Yu. Any player inside the poison zone would continuously lose HP. Not long after, the system opened a notification window. Since Zuo Yu had been bathed in the 3-headed hellhound's poison for over 100 seconds, the cross activated its effect, adaptive poison immunity. After suffering the same poison attack for more than 10 seconds, that poison would no longer deal damage. At this moment, the middle head of Cerberus suddenly let out a painful howl. Then it opened its mouth wide and spat something out. Luckily, Joe had taken out the green dragon crescent blade in time and jammed it in the creature's throat. Otherwise, if he had reached its stomach, he would probably already have turned into a pile of dog crap. The only problem was that the green dragon crescent blade was still stuck in the hellhound's throat. Joe quickly called for Zuo Yu behind him to take this chance and rush into the gates of hell. 2.5 seconds later, they successfully passed through the gates of hell. The system opened a notification. Stage 1 had been completed. Stage 2 was now active. Cross the Acheron River and protect the crosses from being lost. When they reached the riverbank, a small wooden boat happened to appear ahead. The boatman introduced himself as Charon, the ferryman of the Acheron River. If they wanted to cross the Acheron River, they had to pay the ferry fee. Hearing this, Joe did not hesitate and handed him paper money. Seeing that, the ferryman immediately changed his attitude and told them to get on the boat. But just then, countless souls rushed over after passing through the gates of hell. The ferryman pushed them away mercilessly because none of them had paid the ferry fee. On the way, Joe asked the ferryman why those dead souls did not simply cross the river by themselves. The ferryman explained that the Acheron River was not an ordinary river. If Joe did not believe him, he could try sticking his hand out of the boat. The instant Joe's hand touched the river water, countless strange claws shot up from below. The owners of those claws looked hideous and terrifying. The ferryman then explained that they were all unlucky souls who had failed to sneak across the Acheron River. After death, they would sink forever in the freezing river, and as revenge, any living being that entered the Acheron River would be dragged to the bottom and turned into one of them. As he said this, the ferryman quietly swung his oar. He slammed it toward Zhou and Zuoyu from behind. After all, they were clearly living people, yet they had passed through the sacred gates of hell. And they had even openly used money meant for the living. In the blink of an eye, Zhou was thrown into the river by the ferryman. A cold, rotten stench instantly washed over him.
Then, countless claws grabbed wildly at his body. At that moment, Joe activated the corpse ancestor ring and stole the ferryman's agility. Using the speed advantage, he quickly jumped out of the river. His body followed through with a heavy punch toward the ferryman. A massive hole instantly opened in the ferryman's chest. Yet the ferryman did not panic at all. Instead, he burst into laughter. As living smugglers, they had actually dared to kill the ferryman of the Acheron River. Joe would definitely suffer a severe punishment. Hearing this, Joe kicked him into the Acheron River without hesitation, and just as the ferryman completely sank beneath the water, the corner of his mouth curled into a meaningful smile. A moment later, Joe and Zuoyu reached the opposite bank of the Acheron River. However, they saw a shocking sight. Charon, who had originally been thrown into the Acheron River, was standing there alive, and even his clothes looked exactly the same. Seeming to notice Joe's confusion, one of the players explained that this Charon was not the same Charon. It turned out that every team entering the dungeon would meet a ferryman named Charon when crossing the Acheron River. In simple terms, he was a fixed NPC that the dungeon refreshed. When that player heard that Joe and Zuoyu had reached this place by killing Charon, he froze for a moment, then an excited look appeared on his face. In fact, this was a trap, deliberately set by the ferryman. If they killed the ferryman, the difficulty of the first hell afterward would increase by a lot. The so-called first hell, Netherworld, was also known as the Netherworld Judgment Hall. It judged the sins of those who entered. Anyone who killed the ferryman would be judged as an extremely evil person, then sent to hell to suffer and wash away their sins. This player was a dungeon carry hunter named Wang Dafu. As the name suggested, he made money by carrying people through dungeons. He confidently claimed that he had been to this dungeon several times already. So as long as they followed him, he could guarantee that Zhou and Zuoyu would safely leave the Netherworld Judgment Hall. When the group arrived at the Judgment Hall, Wang Dafu turned around and reminded them not to speak carelessly after entering. After pushing open the stone door, they saw a figure seated at the front of the hall. He was Yin Yu, the judge of the first Hell's Netherworld Judgment Hall. He would now judge the sins of everyone present. Wang Dafu stepped forward first and said that he had committed no sins in life, asking the judge to examine his record clearly. After he spoke, Yin Yu began flipping through the Book of Sins in his hand. A moment later, he said that after checking the records, Wang Dafu truly had no record of wrongdoing in life. The judgment result was innocent. When Zhou's name was called, Zhou slowly walked forward. "I am Zhou Yu. I also committed no crimes in life. Please examine my record carefully, Judge." However, Yin Yu froze the moment he turned to the first page of Zhou's record. He had not expected that someone as wicked as Zhou would still have the nerve to claim he had no record of wrongdoing. Sin 1. Disrespecting the bones of the dead. Sin 2. Disturbing the peaceful lives of villagers. Sin 3. Cruelly abusing small animals. And the most serious sin was insulting the three-headed hellhound, killing one of its heads, and killing the ferryman Charon while crossing the Acheron River. With that, Yin Yu waved his hand and announced Zhou's judgment result. He would be sent to the blood pool in the first valley of the seventh hell. There, Zhou would suffer forever in a boiling sea of blood, and through that suffering, his sins would be cleansed. Wang Dafu, standing behind him, was instantly speechless. The reason he had passed the judgment so smoothly was that the stone in his hand had a confusion effect. If he had known this would happen, he would have let Zhou hold the stone before going up for judgment. But he also had not expected Zhou to have committed this many sins. However, when Wang Dafu came back to his senses, he saw a scene he would never forget for the rest of his life.